Good morning. This is the JP Dinnell podcast, episode 88. I am JP Dinnell, and as always, I have Lucas with me. Today, as we are recording this episode, it is Memorial Day. Memorial Day is always a hard day for myself and a lot of my teammates as we reflect and think about our fallen teammates. I know for myself, as this weekend comes close each year, the memories of my fallen teammates come in more than normal. Now, I think about these guys every day. And because of what I get to do at Echelon Front, I'm able to share their stories and the legacy each of them had a few times each week. I know that personally this has helped me deal with the loss of so many friends and teammates. Talking about them, writing about them, and reflecting upon the greatness that each of them had makes me smile and brings happiness, knowing I was fortunate enough to be surrounded by incredible humans that for the most part died doing what they loved. Now I say for the most part because not all of them died in combat or in training, and we'll get to that later. Incredible humans that faced evil and said, "I'll be your Huckleberry." I'll be your Huckleberry is something that a few team guys and I would actually talk about, joke about, and a few of them actually got tattoos to represent that actual mindset and attitude. It was a common thing we talked about in training when I was running training with Jocko and then for all the West Coast SEAL teams. And, we knew that our job had inherent risk of death. And we had all lost, for the most part, the guys that were there lost close friends due to combat and had been in some sketchy situations in combat, and just we understood the inherent risk. And another very common attitude of all these guys that I was able to do life with and alongside from and that I learned from, that I loved and respected was the mindset that comes from the scripture, Isaiah 6:8. Then I heard a voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? And whom will go for us?" And then as that scripture goes on, the individual says, "Send me." Now, this verse has been instilled into combat units for a very long time, and it has also been shared in combat movies to share how this mindset of faith is comforting for those who are facing evil. Evil is a very real thing, and evil exists, and so does good. And I was surrounded by good men who were willing to face evil, to fight evil, to help those that could not do it for themselves. There is comfort in knowing that you have salvation, and that no matter what is in front of you that you might face, the Lord is going to be with you. And that if it is your day, then you know you will be headed home to heaven. I have no doubt that many of my fallen teammates are now guardian angels protecting myself, my family, and many other people. I remember after a funeral, a team guy saying, "God must be assembling his own SEAL team because he's taking the best ones from us." Now, I used to get really depressed and angry this time of the year. And I would drink away the weekend and this day to numb that pain. But I know that's not the answer. And I know that these men would not want me to waste the weekend or this day like that. That is not a way to honor them. Today, I hope to share some of their stories for all of us to learn from, so we can honor them and think and reflect upon them as this episode comes out. Lucas, how are you, buddy?
Man, grateful.
Yeah.
This was something that yesterday we talked about in church, and we make it a point that we make this distinction between worship of country and worship of the heroes, but also memorializing and remembering what was necessary for us to have the freedom to be able to worship. And so yesterday, as has been our practice, we had a moment of silence for the fallen, especially those that are represented by families in our church. And during our time of congregational prayer, we highlighted prayer for the Gold Star families and represented in our congregation and those in our community. And so, we've talked about this before. As we joke about the NCC, the civilian, and we don't often think about the things that we say. And so the idea that we'll wish somebody a happy Memorial Day is just something like between people who haven't served or haven't had a loved one that was lost, that it seems like the thing to do because it's a holiday and, we're off work, the banks are closed. Like, hey, happy Memorial Day, and you doing brisket or you doing smoked sausage today? But, the privilege that I have of being part of a community or being brought into community, I will say that, not part of the community, being brought into a community that's got so many incredible veterans and guys who have experienced such tremendous loss. The idea of a happy Memorial Day has shifted to me to just a day of complete gratitude for what you and your teammates risked, but also for those who didn't come home.
Yeah.
And Mama Lee right now is putting on this week a camp to help veterans and honoring her son in that way. And I know that today's a special day for America's Mighty Warriors and all of them as well. And it's a pretty amazing thing that we get to support and to be a part of is what they're doing there. So yeah, just a lot of gratitude today, man.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I have my close teammates, friends, listed that we'll talk through. And some of these guys were my best friends, and some of these guys were close friends, and some of these guys were guys that had impact over me. And there's also a lot of team guys that aren't on this list because, while they're there, they were my teammates, and I knew of them and knew them. Like, I also wanted to keep this list to the guys that I could share actual stories about that I knew, to respect them and their families. So yeah, it's, there's a lot that, happens this time of the year. And, there's a lot of, organizations that do great things to help honor veterans. And, today, I know our church, it wasn't an official church thing, but one of our leaders at the church who runs all the security, Joshua McCaskill, he put together the Murph workout. And the church threw money at it, and they built pull-up bars and all these things on site at the church. And so there's a large group that met this morning. Unfortunately, I didn't make it to it. As you know, I've been having some health things working through. And last night, part of the things that's weird, I get these really bad cramps in my head, my neck, and my back where they'll completely seize up. And this morning, my back was completely seized up to where it's which compared to other people, it's nothing, but it was there's no way I was going to be able to even go do the Murph or walk through it, or even be there.
You mean you're not going to be able to run them? What is it, a mile run?
So you run 1 mile,
pull-ups?
100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 squats, 1 mile run. And I was up, I was getting ready, and even Amanda was like, hey, are you, can you even drive there? Can you go there? Oh no, she didn't say, are you drive there? I was wondering, am I going to be able to drive there? I couldn't get dressed this morning, and it was just thankfully I have Aaron Archer who's able to come help work on me and do everything. But it was a bummer not being able to be there with the guys from the church. But it's Memorial Day is not about going and doing a workout, but what Joshua put together at our church was an opportunity to bring men and women together that wanted to do a hard workout, that wanted just, they start off with prayer, they read some citations, and they were able to do this group workout, which I thought was absolutely incredible. And, there's times I've been able to participate in them, and there's other times I don't. And to be honest, there are times I just don't want to be around anybody on Memorial Day because to your point, it's more of, hey, I'm just thinking and reflecting upon these guys. And so this morning I opted out because of how my body was feeling, and I just been thinking about these guys today. And so I know we're able to get this episode in today, and I was just thinking about, okay, what's the best thing I can do for these guys? And I think sharing some of their stories, some are going to be emotional, I'm sure. I don't even know the stories I'm going to share yet because I have so many for each person, but One of the things that I do when I speak is I always pray before I speak that the Lord will speak through me, and whatever message needs to be heard is what I'll be able to relay. And I do that at Echelon Front. I do this for this podcast. The very few times lately, unfortunately, just because of priorities and scheduling, even on Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu, like when I'm able to be on that podcast, and I don't have things scripted out. But today, I'd like to just kind of talk through the guys. And you mentioned Mama Lee and America's Mighty Warriors. Well, Mama Lee is Debbie Lee, and we called her Mama Lee because of how she treated us when her son, Marc Lee, was killed. So Marc Lee was killed in action on August 2nd, 2006. And Marc was a stud.
Yeah.
Was a stud. And, a lot of people don't know he went through buds. He quit once, went out to the fleet, came back, because there's people that are like, oh, guys that quit buds, that like, they'll never come back and be a good SEAL. Well, that's not true, because guess what? Marc quit, came back. Mikey quit, came back. We're absolute studs. And I remember Marc, he was in a different task unit during our workup, and he didn't join until like the tail end of our workup.
Oh, really?
And the thing that I, share about Marc, and I know I briefly talked about what he did in combat, and I'll share a little bit of that as well. But the thing that stands out to me about Marc was his attitude, just his positive attitude. He's a hard worker. He was strong. He was a machine gunner. He, carried the big Mark 48 machine gun, which is a heavy, big machine gun. And him and Mikey and Ryan Job during workup and deployment, most of the time they were carrying that gun without the sling. Now they had the sling on it, but they didn't even use the sling to let the gun rest because they were wanting to be ready. They were wanting to be ready for when it came time for them to have to engage, which we engaged a lot of enemy fighters on that deployment. The gun wasn't hanging low. They weren't complacent. They weren't lazy. And that came from their attitude of like, hey, I am going to protect my guys. Like that's what a machine gunner does. That's what a machine gunner does. They lay down cover fire. They engage enemy fighters at a large amount. I mean, these guys are carrying hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rounds on them so that they can lay down fire, allow us to make decisions, move, and they're protecting your movement and just complete violence of action response to, oh, we get attacked. The machine gunners are just guns a-blazing in every direction, scanning for enemy fighters. And Marc fit into our task unit right away.
Yeah.
And I don't say that lightly because that's a real big thing to think about is he came in to Task Unit Bruiser where we had a very strong unity and bond. And for him to be able to come in to Task Unit Bruiser and just relate to the guys and just be a part of our attitude and mindset right away was awesome. But it shows you the humility that he had because he was in another task unit. He loved those guys, gets pulled over. And instead of, he could have had an attitude. He could have been frustrated that he wasn't with his guys. He had a positive attitude. He instantly started building relationships and friendships and, working hard and, taking care of the guys and going above and beyond. And, even when, the older guys were, what's the proper word? Because we definitely would not say hazing because that's not allowed.
That doesn't happen.
That doesn't happen.
Initiating?
No, not even that.
No?
We'll just say engaging.
Yeah,
When the older guys
yeah.
were engaging with the newer guys, like he had this awesome attitude, and he just carried that into the battlefield. Always had a smile, which is important because when you're in an environment like Ramadi, where it's just pure chaos and evil and violence and death and injuries. And, we're going to memorial services for these soldiers and Marines. And, part of us being there was, hey, make sure you guys have your personal things lined up. Make sure your wills are up to date and all these things, like knowing like, hey, it could be one of us. He always maintained an incredible attitude, and Marc was a believer and loved the Lord. Wrote a letter to his mom and a lot of friends that, that Mama Lee now has as Marc's last letter home. And in that letter, it was just about love and compassion and helping people. Like, go do a random act of kindness for somebody. And what's incredible is, Marc's legacy continues to live because of what his mom chose to do. And I think, it's fitting that we also honor his mom and the foundation that she started, America's Mighty Warriors, which helps veterans get the treatments that they need that unfortunately the VA doesn't cover, or the military doesn't cover, or sometimes, actually most of the time, insurance doesn't cover for these wounds, whether they're visible or invisible wounds that guys are dealing with. It's just incredible what America's Mighty Warriors does. And like you said, she's doing a retreat this week for the Gold Star families and for veterans and their families to be able to just go relax, have some time to decompress and just interact with other people. So it's pretty incredible. And man, I guess like when I think about Marc, we used to have we have a platoon video. And when I used to watch that, it was, you get towards the end where we had like the memorial stuff for Marc and Mikey on that DVD CD that we had. Just remembering the pictures of him smiling and just living life to the fullest. So, Marc was one of those guys like Mike, the rest of these guys that live life to the fullest. So,
yeah, the letter that Marc wrote home is one that, man, it sticks with me. Anytime I read it and go over it, and particularly like listening to Mama Lee talk about that letter. We've had the privilege of interacting with her at a couple of musters, and there are some things in that letter that are only things that I think somebody who knew him well can really decipher, because it was such an intimate letter home to family. Mm-hmm. And talking to her about some of those things, and this section, what does this mean? And he writes this, I know what it means to see real evil, and to see the hatred of somebody just because of the nation that they were born in, and all of those kinds of things. And these people who are, he says, ignorant of Western civilization and what that really means, and that as much as he was on mission for doing what needed to be done there in fighting the insurgents, that his heart was also like really broken for the people who were caught in the middle of it. Mm-hmm. And that's one of those things that I think that dichotomy for a lot of warriors is obviously something that you guys deal with every day, but it's not something that there's often a lot of light shed on. I think the movie Warfare did a good job of it. Certainly, but listening to her talk a little bit about that was really powerful. Whenever I was asking about that letter, I was like, what is this? And she was like, yeah, his heart was really broken for the people that were stuck in the middle, mm-hmm. particularly the kids, and that it was something that motivated him to do the job that you guys were doing. Yeah. It wasn't just the guys back home. It was you got to see it. You were there in the middle of it, and you're like, what? These are people too. People that God loves, people that we're supposed to be here to protect, that our job is it's bigger than what we initially thought it was. Yeah. And that perspective, especially from a mom talking about her son like that, has just been really powerful for me.
Yeah. It's a good shift of our perspectives.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. So next one, Mikey Monsoor, he's killed in action on September 29th, 2006. We were packed up, ready to go home. And it was the tail end of our deployment. Army unit requested some additional sniper support down in the Malab district. And the Malab district was a really bad area. I mean, you knew you were going to be getting it. Like, you just knew that you knew you're going down there. It's a real bad area. And they sent 2 small elements down there to set up sniper overwatch positions down there as the units were down there doing their clearances and doing their work. And both overwatch positions engaged multiple enemy fighters throughout the day. And unfortunately, an enemy fighter got close enough to the building that Mikey and these other guys were in undetected, threw a grenade up on the rooftop, hit Mikey in the chest, bounced in front of him, and Mikey had the out. He was the one that could have jumped back and gotten behind a little piece of cover. But Mikey, without hesitation, as he yelled out grenade, dove on top of that grenade and absorbed the blast of that grenade, most of that blast. And he did that without hesitation because of the two guys that were laying right next to him on that rooftop. And both these guys were married. And Mikey was single. He had the out, but because of his love for his teammates, because of who Mikey was, he was a protector, and there was no hesitation on his behalf. Jumps on top of the grenade and fought. He fought for 30 minutes to stay alive before he died due to those wounds. He was posthumously awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his actions. And, we commissioned a ship in his honor a few years ago. And, when I think about Mikey, it's very similar to Marc. He loved life, lived life to the fullest, had a Corvette, had a street bike, and then he had a little beater vehicle that he would drive. So the beater vehicle he would drive to and from work. The Corvette was for the weekends and going back home to his family. Street bike, we'd have a lot of good rides, a lot of fun out there. And he lived life to the absolute fullest. I don't think there was ever a day that Mikey wasn't doing something to better himself, to better his friends, his family. He was an incredible machine gunner, an incredible comms guy, carried the machine gun and the radio, which are two heavy pieces of equipment. Most of the time, you're not doing both of those things. But again, that's who Mikey was. He was a comms guy. Cool. Guess what? He's also a machine gunner. Cool. He was going to do both of them. And he probably could have, not carried the machine gun because he was the primary radio guy, comms guy, because comms is very important. And he was working with Seth on all the communications and all the, relaying stuff when we're out there on missions. But he also understood the need for us to have another machine gun in Ramadi. And there was no complaining, no pushback, nothing. It was just like, cool, roger that. And that was his attitude, was roger that. It was always just like, roger that. And, he was a hard worker. He's a big, strong guy. We, me and some of the guys that were carrying his casket when we buried him, we were like jokingly complaining as we were carrying him about how big and strong he had gotten. Like, dude, bro, like,
lay off the creatine.
Yeah, it was just, he's a big, strong frogman. Mikey was a frogman. All these guys were frogmen, except for one who wasn't in the SEAL teams, but very close and helped in our community that I'll talk about later. Every guy that graduates from BUD/S and gets his Trident is a Navy SEAL, but not every Navy SEAL is a frogman.
Yeah.
And Mikey was a frogman. And I remember a few times, we had these suits that we were issued to us during our workup in case we're going to do personal security detail work, because I did that on my first deployment. And so we would go out and we'd have our suit night. And there was a handful of us from the platoon. We'd put on those suits and go out in downtown San Diego and act like we were doing personal security for different people within our group. And, just going out and having fun and drinks and all like suited up. And people are like, wait, hold on.
Who's that guy?
Yeah. And we were trying to figure out who the guy was that we were like protecting and escorting around and getting their drinks for and standing around them while they're sitting drinking.
Awesome. Now, how is that guy dressed? Is he in a suit or is he just in shorts and flip flops?
No, he's in a suit because we would just rotate who that guy
who the guy was
to the different bar.
That's awesome.
Yeah, if you're a single guy and you're the principal getting protected,
oh yeah,
that's
gonna be a good night.
It's a good way to get some attention for the females,
for sure.
And I just remember I was going to take a drink one time, and I was like looking at Mikey, and he was like making fun of this other guy because this other guy was like super drunk at the bar, like trying to get a drink and just couldn't get his straw in his mouth.
Oh my gosh!
So Mikey is mocking him, acting like he can't get this straw in his mouth, and that was a thing. Like him, Cowie, myself, and Benny, and a few other guys we do act like the straw would be up in her lip, and we're like, oh, like trying to get a drink, making fun of this guy. And I just think back to that, and I'm like, yeah, creating good memories no matter
Yeah.
what. And even in our workup, creating good memories, you're just having fun. And, when we were on deployment, he really loved olives, and his family would send
Like
him
black olives or like the green olives?
all of them. Like the
Really?
stuffed olives
Okay, yeah,
with
yeah.
like
Like the
peppers
jalapenos or the
jalapenos or
pimento.
pimento. And so his parents would send those over. And Mikey and I would watch the show. Back then everything was on DVD. And so you had the different DVD series that
Yep.
we would buy overseas from the little things on base. And half the time they wouldn't work. And we'd come back and be like, dude, this didn't work. I want my money back, or I want another set. And they'd be like, oh no, my friend. And we're like, no. Like, and so then we'd get the CD set. And, but one of them he would watch was the Thirsty Traveler, and we would watch this series together. And it was these they would just travel to different areas of the world and try the food and the drinks, and that was one of the things. That we talked about doing was like going on some different trips after Ramadi, and just kind of like recreating that series that we watched.
Yeah.
Dude, he was hilarious. So in our setup for our rooms in Camp Corregidor, we were in this old blown out building, and the fire pit's right next to us. So that was awesome. Not so much. The burn pits, not fire pits. The burn pits the burn pits were right next to our building. And I remember there was a few nights I'd be like we're in this old blown out building called Full Metal Jacket out of Camp Corregidor, which was a forward operating base on the eastern side of Ramadi. And so we got there, and there's a bunch of Marines and soldiers in that building as well. And we had this one little section at the beginning before our whole platoon came over. So we had one section downstairs. We built it out. It was just blown out building with dirt floors. So we built up plywood floors for us to be able to have, and then we built out our little rooms. And right next to me was Benny, and across from me was Seth, but it was like closed off, but I could like talk them to the wall. And behind me was closed off was Mikey. So I was surrounded by my guys, and a few other guys, but they don't want to be mentioned, and I respect that. And one's still active, getting ready to retire. Another, our corpsman, he's been out for a while. But Mikey, with his Leatherman, he like was talking to me one night, and he was like, "Hey, you awake?" And I'm like, "Yep." And so then he comes over and like sits down in the bed, and we're just like talking through stuff. And I remember one time I was like trying to sleep, and he had like carved this little hole in the plywood with his Leatherman, just like, like if you're in jail, like just scraping like little bits and pieces away.
Like it's Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah. And then he got like a little hole in the wall, and then he was using his Leatherman to like cut it out a little bit more and more and more. And he would crack chem lights and push them through. And so then they'd fall into my room and glow. And I'm like, dude, oh my gosh. But Mikey would just do stuff like that just to kind of mess with the guys, but to have fun.
Yeah.
To have fun with the guys. Man, his gear, like Mark's gear, was always squared away. Was prepped, was ready to go. The guns were clean, taken care of. They also, when we were going out in the Humvees, they manned the 50 cal machine guns on the top of that, completely exposed. Like, we're in the vehicles. Those guys are standing tall and brave, manning those machine guns on the top of the turrets. And, Mikey was a brave guy, and he was a good teammate. And there's just, as I'm thinking, there's like so many other thoughts and memories that come back, but just for time, and, maybe we'll share those at another time in the future. We can, but as I just think about Mikey, those are the things I think about him, and the legacy he left with those two guys that he saved. Because had he jumped back and away from that, and they had no idea, they wouldn't have been shielded at all from that blast. That grenade would have landed right in between those guys, and you can't play the shoulda, woulda, coulda game. But the likelihood of those guys surviving, had Mikey not done what he did, was probably pretty low. And, those guys have kids, and they're married, and it's because of Mikey.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, what, I know we've got other names to get through on this list, but, each one of the platoons in your task unit lose a guy 8 weeks apart. And for SEAL Team 3, these are the first major losses that they had, if I remember, I think maybe since Vietnam.
Well, Marc Lee was... no, because we had guys in Afghanistan when the war first kicked off at different units that had lost guys in Afghanistan. But Marc was the first Navy SEAL killed in Iraq.
Wow.
And then Mikey. And then, at the beginning of our deployment, Cowie was wounded pretty bad.
Yeah.
Pulled out of country for surgery and recovery, and was back in San Diego. And then another one of our guys that was wounded very bad was Ryan Job. On the same day that Marc was killed on August 2nd, Ryan Job was shot in the face by an enemy sniper. The bullet actually hit his buttstock and then fragmented it into his face.
Oh, wow.
And just horrific injury. Like the corpsmen that responded up on that rooftop, when they saw Ryan, Leif talks about it as well. Like they all thought he was dead.
Yeah.
Just from how bad it looked. And so Ryan gets pulled out of country. He went to Germany for surgery, recovery, and rehab. Makes his way back to the United States. His high school sweetheart quits nursing school to take care of him full time. They get married, and from just all the fragment that was stuck in his brain, all the swelling, all the, unfortunate injuries that comes from surgery as well. When you're dealing with all that stuff, he ended up losing his vision completely, had no sense of smell, and then no sense of taste either. And I remember the first time when we were back and then Ryan was in San Diego and I saw Ryan, I didn't know he had no smell anymore. I just, I didn't know that. And, you're sitting there talking to him and, I just remember saying like, man, doesn't it, feel good to be back in San Diego and the smell of the ocean, right? I'm just trying to talk to my bro, and there's a group of us, and he didn't get mad. He didn't say anything back. He just said, he goes, I can't smell anything. I don't have my sense of smell anymore. And I just remember how I felt from asking him that question. I'm just trying to talk with one of my guys, one of my teammates, a guy that I loved. A guy that was so incredibly brave and worked so hard to be in Task Unit Bruiser and to stay in the Task Unit Bruiser and to be an asset and not a liability. I felt like a jerk. I felt like the biggest jerk ever. But Ryan knew I didn't do that intentionally. I wasn't trying to be rude. And, he actually comforted me. He's like, hey man, it's not a big deal. Like, hey, it's just part of it.
Yeah.
But for him to have that attitude of hey, it's just part of it was unreal, and he wanted to stay in the teams, and they were doing everything they could to keep him in the teams, and obviously blind, he's not going to be able to be active in the teams, but the guy has a lot of knowledge and experience, and he's a smart guy, very very smart guy, and so for a while I believe he was working with Warcom as an advisor of gear. They're like, hey, we need this gear, and dude, he's at kind of the point where his filter's gone. Yeah, with people, he's still being professional, but he would be like, no, that's stupid. That gear's stupid. That's not, we're not going to use that type of stuff. Which you actually you need people like that. Yeah, that instead of the good idea fairies from the higher ups who are so disconnected from the battlefield and the guys, and I don't mean that in a bad way. They choose to be. It's just part of the natural separation as you go up the chain of command. There is going to be separation. And Ryan would act as a liaison and help out with that stuff. Now, he ended up getting medically retired from the military. And, he's completely blind, no sense of smell, no sense of taste, but chooses to not complain ever. Not once did he ever complain about that to other people. And I think about that, and I'm like, good Lord, the things I complain about. This morning, not going to do the Murph because I of my just my neck and my back just completely seized up, and I didn't complain to anybody about it, but I'm thinking about Ryan. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me! This guy is completely blind, had no issues with what the cards that were dealt to him and made the most of his life. He got his business degree with a 4.0 GPA.
Pretty impressive, man.
It's crazy. I heard stories from guys that would be with him in the town that he ended up moving to with his wife. And they would be driving him around and he'd be like, hey, you just missed the turn.
Can't see, can't smell. Those they missed the turn.
Yeah, but just was so aware of
so
things.
in tune with everything.
It was in tune with stuff and knew where he was supposed to be. He summited Mount Rainier completely blind.
Really?
Yeah.
Dude, that's rad.
Trained for it, prepared for it. And, Mount Rainier is no joke.
No.
There are healthy people that train and prepare for that have their vision, that don't make it to the summit. And he did that completely blind.
Wow.
He was doing cooking classes with his wife, and he's just living life to the fullest. And I remember during our workup, his nickname was Biggles, the desert hippo.
Okay.
And there was like some cartoon, I guess, that the guys got it from in Charlie Platoon, and they'd make him like do this little dance or whatever. And he was a bigger guy, not muscular, but bigger.
Right.
He
had some combat swimmer muscle.
He was thick, and but it became one of those things where life was like, hey, if you're going to be in this platoon, you got to be able to keep up physically. He had let himself go after SQT and wasn't disciplined with working out and his diet. And we started workup, and it's tasking a bruiser.
Yeah.
And what was cool, Leif has shared this on Jocko's podcast. I'm just giving a Cliff Notes version of it. But what I thought was cool is, Leif had the conversation with them, and some older guys were assigned to like PTing with them and like getting them there where he needed to be. And so in addition to doing our workup in the desert, arguably one of our hardest blocks of training that we do in the SEAL teams, he's also working out every day to get where he needed to be. And it's just incredible. Like, just, okay, I recognize I'm not where I need to be. What am I going to go do about it? Because you can make excuses, you can point fingers, you can blame other people, which is most people's natural tendencies. But instead, Ryan took ownership over his health and decided, okay, I'm going to be an asset and put in the work. And he had good mentorship from the older guys in the platoon. One of those guys is Bob Holland, lead Bob, from Jocko's podcast, who started the company Hooley Golf. Bob was one of those guys.
Yeah.
And another guy, Jeremy, I can say his name, but he's out and, he's come to a couple different musters that we do to see what we do. And it's, he had two awesome older guys that were helping him get squared away. And so when I think about Ryan, I think about, the amount of work he put in to be an asset and not a liability. And during our hardest block of training, still making the time to work out, watching what he was eating, and putting in the work to be a frogman.
Yeah.
And that's what's required. Hey, you want to be a frogman? It means that you're gonna have to put in a lot of extra work.
Yeah.
So
well, it sounds like that prepared him for the trials and things he was going to face later in life too, is just having that type of discipline and dedication, but also that community. And I don't think that that's something that can be overstated is, and we've talked about this a little bit before. We've just kind of touched on it. The community within the teams is so strong.
yeah.
And, having that brotherhood, gives a lot of these guys something that, when they experience a tragedy, that, they know that they still have support, and you guys do a great job of letting them know that.
And that's critical for people's healing and recovery.
Yeah,
is their
no doubt.
mindset, their attitude, and knowing that they have the support. So
Yeah. And so Ryan passed from complications of operation.
And so he was going in for his 22nd surgery.
Good grief.
And it was a week that him and his wife found out they were expecting a baby girl. And he died after surgery due to complications that the hospital staff caused.
Wow.
So, and that was on September 24th, 2009. So 3 years later, almost to the date from when we lost Mikey, Ryan passed away.
And then that's 3 years and some change after his injury.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man.
So 3 years of just surgeries after surgery, just fighting and, you know, getting some, I guess you'd say groundwork, right? That he had made in progress, I guess is a better word, progress that he had made. And it was a mistake that happened after surgery.
Good grief.
Yeah. So, the next three, sorry. go
Yeah,
ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, like, so what's, you know, at that point, where are you in 2009?
I'm in training. I'm at Trade At.
You're at Trade At?
Yeah.
So you're at Trade At with Jocko.
Yep.
And were there any other guys from TU Bruiser that were there with y'all?
Yeah, there's a handful.
Okay.
Yeah. Some are still in, some went to do different stuff, but yeah.
Sure. So when you guys get the news at Trade At, what's that? How does that word come down? Because it's not, I'm assuming at this point it's not official channels, right? He's already been medically retired from the SEALs. So
Yeah, I don't remember. I can't give you a solid answer on how that word was disseminated. I just
but
remember
like how did you get it?
from my leadership at the command.
Yeah. So did you get it from like Jocko and those guys?
No,
or?
it was from leadership in the assault cell that I was a part of, you know, and then you just hear about that. And what's crazy about our community is, like, even though like he was out, we still treated it as if he was in. Like, in regards to, all right, hey, there's going to be a funeral. We need to start putting stuff together. There's going to be a memorial service. We need to start putting stuff together. Hey, we need to, like, how do we get guys out there and travel and everything? And there's a bunch of foundations and a lot of, like, individual wealthy people that just donated flights and hotels and everything to help cover that, and rental cars and everything else like that.
That's awesome.
It's crazy. The logistical support that goes to one of those things is just unreal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's unreal.
Yeah.
So the next three guys, Darrik Benson, Aaron Vaughn, JT, were all killed on August 6, 2011, extortion 17 helicopter crash. Darrik Benson was one of my roommates, one of my best friends in the teams. He's from Northern California as well. We both used to ride street bikes together, race street bikes together. I remember, when was it? It was in my first platoon. No, in SQT, they were like slightly ahead of us, this group in SQT. And then he checked in SEAL Team 3, because he was one Bud's class ahead of me.
Mm-hmm.
And so he checks into SEAL Team 3, I check into SEAL Team 3. And I remember us just like meeting and just talking and find out we're both from Northern California. And, you know, he's from the Napa Valley area. And,
How posh.
yeah. Darrik was a phenom, athlete, stud, operator. Anybody that knows about Extortion 17, you know, it was with Development Group, which is, you know, out on the East Coast. So this is not like information that's not out there on open source. And there's a lot of things about Darrik that I could share. One of the first things I'll share is I just remember at his funeral, before I was getting ready to speak, one of the other teammates that was at that command, they called him, they referred to Darrik as Damn Neck 2.0, like the next best version.
Mm-hmm.
And for guys at that command to say that about you is unreal. And the only reason why they would say that, they're not going to just say that just because he passed away, which unfortunately happens when people pass away. People will elaborate on how good of a person that person was, because, you know, they love them, they want to respect them, they want to honor them, but there can definitely be elaborations on how good of a person they are.
The memories are often stronger than the reality, especially whenever you're dealing with grief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That wasn't the case for Darrik.
Yeah.
And, you know, he was meticulous with everything. Like, very meticulous. His gear was always squared away. He was in phenomenal shape, extremely strong and agile and explosive, and just, he was what a SEAL should be like physically. And we would do a lot of workouts together. That was like part of our thing. We'd come back from work. If we were both in town at the same time, you know, part of our, you know, come back from work, kind of relax a little bit, take some pre-workout, let it kick in, and then head to the gym.
Yeah, man.
And we would lift together and train together. I mean, there was times I remember I was sitting on the couch, just smoked from the day, just kind of decompressing, watching a little bit of TV. He'd be like, "Hey man, let's go do some sprints." I'm like, "Okay." I was not thinking about going and doing sprints for an hour.
Right.
And so we would walk down to this field that was close to his house. That he owned a house out in East Lake, and so I was renting a room from him, and we would go down there and we would do sprints for an hour. And it just like that was Darrik. I remember he had a few street bikes at once, and one of them was this really nice race bike that he had. And it was inside. We would bring it inside the house and put it on the bike stand along the wall like it was a piece of artwork for the house. So when like buddies would be over, or if you have some girls over or whatever, it was always like, "What is that?" "Oh, it's Darrik's race bike." And, it was just like our piece of artwork that we had inside the house.
Yeah.
I mean, he was
Much cooler than a Picasso.
Yes,
Yeah.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I remember one Saturday morning, myself and Jake, one of the other roommates that lived with Darrik, we both got woken up early, and we're both hungover, maybe still intoxicated from that night, and he's vacuuming upstairs, cleaning, like right outside the door, like making sure he's hitting the door with the vacuum cleaner. I'm just like, I remember I get up and Jake gets up and Jake's like, "Dude, what the?" And I'm like, "Yep." and he would leave notes in our bathroom that Jake and I shared, telling us that it was time we needed to clean, and we weren't like dirty.
Right.
Like I was clean, Jake was clean, but Darrik was just OCD meticulous. Like wanted the house to be spotless clean all the time, and it's like, okay. And so we would give him a hard time sometimes, and but we would clean up our stuff. I remember there's a few times, Darrik's cooking dinner, I'm cooking dinner, and and then when Jake was with us, like we're all kind of cooking dinner separate, but Darrik would cook dinner, have his food on his plate, wash all the dishes, dry them, and put them away before he would eat. That's just the way Darrik was. Jake and I, not so much.
Yeah.
And we would
do it a hot meal.
Yeah, we were, got done eating. You're going to let your dishes soak in the sink. And sometimes it would bother Darrik so much to the point where he would then do our dishes. And so once we saw that little button, Jake and I, we would just like, all right, we'd leave our dishes out knowing that he would clean them for us. We had a thing we did when it was just Darrik and I for a while, like Techno Thursdays, where I had a CD from like this techno music that I got when on my first deployment went to Thailand. He went to Thailand when we were in Ramadi. He had a PACON deployment, so part of that is he was in Thailand, which he loved training Muay Thai. He actually did some Muay Thai fights as well as an amateur. And I remember...
Bro, that's serious stuff, man.
Oh, yeah.
Those dudes are vicious.
Yes. Yeah, he actually went over to Thailand, trained, and fought over there as well.
Wow.
Yeah. And I remember, so we would do Techno Thursday nights, and we would just only play techno music from Thailand. And it would just blasting it in the house. And we just that was our thing. We'd get ready after work, before we go work out. Techno music just blasting the whole time. And then come back from the gym and techno music back on while we're like making dinner and just like, just having like a good time or whatever. And then we would go out and grab some drinks and come back, and
that's hysterical.
Then Friday work and whatever. And so it was, a lot of fun. I remember one night we did a Vato night where we dressed up like cholos, and Darrik picked a bar for us to go to that was... We were the only white guys going in there.
Yeah, for sure.
And, man, the pictures from that night are hilarious. Like, we went and, we had the Chuck Taylor shoes.
Mm-hmm.
We had the Dickies that we starched and ironed.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, man.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how...
with the top button only.
Yeah, I don't know how we didn't get stabbed or shot. Because... But I think, but Darrik being Darrik and me being me and Darrik and us together, like... We just went out and made friends.
Yeah.
And I remember we were out in this one bar, and this one guy was saying he was a SEAL. And so we started like asking questions. The guy was just full of it.
Yeah.
And I just remember I just escorted the guy out in a rear naked chokehold as he went unconscious. Darrik escorted another guy out in the same manner. And we had zero other issues that night.
Yeah.
Just having fun. And these guys, you know, it's just like actual Mexican biker gangs that were there.
For sure.
Just drinking with us, having fun. We drink. It's just, I think about that stuff and I'm like, who comes up with that stuff?
Yeah.
But it was, you know, Darrik just trying to love life and have, you know, enjoy it. And, you know, he was, you know, a class ahead of me and like I said, in Buds, and he was out at, you know, went through Green Team and was at the command out there. And, you know, would just reach out and tell me what it was like and what type of training they were doing. And, you know, when I was at Trade It and we're out at some of the common training places that we'd go to and they're there, it was, you know, it was good seeing him and those guys. But, you know, Darrik always shifted his mindset to whatever unit he was a part of. And, you know, when they talked about Darrik out at that command, it was the same when he was in the West Coast teams. You know, he was one of the early guys into work, would stay at work late, working on his gear, tweaking his gear, working out, preparing, because he wanted to be the best version. And, yeah, that was Darrik.
That sounds like a cool dude. Like, definitely like the kind of guy that in 2011 we would have all enjoyed hanging out together.
100%.
Yeah.
He also had a, like the house we stayed in was beautiful. His daily driver was just an old single cab Toyota Tacoma. You know, awesome little truck. But he did that so that he could have his nice street bikes, and he also had a Dodge Viper truck. I don't know if you remember that truck.
I did not. I can't recall that they made a Dodge Viper truck.
It was unreal. It was red, like that candy red. Dude.
And it had that the V10 motor in it.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, man.
That thing was a lot of fun. When Darrik and I would
doubt.
take that out. But I remember one time
The cars were hard enough to drive.
Yeah. That truck was unreal. But he would go back home, and most of the time when we'd go back home, we would drive together, and his dad would pick him up, or I'd drop him off in like along the route, and then I would head to Sacramento, and then I'd pick him up, and I would come back. But one of these trips, he was headed up there, and for whatever reason, he needed a bigger truck than his little Tacoma. And so he asked me, he's like, hey, do you mind if we trade trucks? Can I take your truck? Because I had
This thing looks insane.
Oh, yeah.
The SRT 10.
Yep.
Wow.
That red one right there.
That's what he had.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah.
Good grief.
And so I had I believe at the time, it was an 05 Silverado that I drove.
Did you guys race?
Yeah. I raced the Tacoma. But he needed a bigger truck, and so he's like, hey, do you mind if we trade trucks? And I was like, yeah, no worries. I mean, we would literally like trade vehicles, whatever, not a big deal. We'd work on our vehicles together, our motorcycles together in our garage. You know, there'd be many times like the bikes are up on the stands and him and I are changing out the gearing or, you know, doing different stuff on the bike, on our different bikes. And, he, needed that truck, and I was like, yeah, cool, take mine. I'm thinking I'm going to use the Tacoma because, but he gave me the keys to his Viper truck. That was fun to drive. But it was also one of those things where, you know, I wasn't going to like ragdoll it around and race it. Like, this is my best friend's baby.
Right.
And so, I mean, I definitely took it out. I know I took it out on a date night one night and, you know, was, you know, just driving around and, you know, having a great time in that truck. But it, when he was driving, that thing would be pushed to the limits. And Darrik was a phenomenal driver. We actually went to the Rod Hall off-road Hummer driving and racing school together. Okay. That was our first like trip together.
Yeah.
That developed our close friendship in the SEAL teams. You know, when I had just checked in and, you know, on a Friday, and they're like, hey, Sunday you're leaving for this off-road Hummer driving and racing school. And I was like, oh, dang. And
that sucks.
Yeah, so Seth and I went on that trip, and Darrik was on that trip, and that's how we became really good friends. But yeah, he was a phenomenal driver, like unreal skill set when it came to driving, and very mechanically inclined. And so, yeah, that truck was a beautiful, beautiful truck.
Yeah, 500 horsepower. And you can own one yourself right now. You can get either the 2004 or 2005 versions, and they're still only going for $40,000. Things held their value with
Yeah.
That's when I worked at Discount Tire, we had a couple of guys come in with Vipers, and I just remember the first time one of our bosses was like, "Y'all aren't gonna touch this car. It's gonna be me." And we're like, "Have you ever driven one before?" Like, no. We're like, "We just want you to know before you get in that car that it wants to kill you." It's the whole reason that the Viper was made is because it's a car that's trying to kill you. And he's like, "All right, whatever." He put it into first gear and he nearly launched it over a curb. And luckily, he was humble enough. He turned it off and handed the keys to my brother Thomas. And he was like, "Get that in the bays. I'd never want to touch it again." I was like, "Dude, that's it."
Yeah, because if you're not used to driving those types of vehicles.
No, and that motor sounds weird. But yeah.
Yeah. It's a beautiful truck.
Yeah, no doubt.
Beautiful truck.
Yeah, I don't even... now the gearhead part of me is turning. He's like, how does the weight displacement work for something like that? That there's nothing in the back end in that thing, I'm sure. Was it just like trying to swing around in front the entire time?
Yeah. And even with the wide, high-performance tires.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah. Next, Aaron Vaughn, also killed, same date, it was in that helicopter on Extortion 17. Aaron and I were traded together. That's how we met each other in the assault cell. Just, good old boy from Tennessee, Union City, Tennessee, which was the same city that Zach Underwood, Jake Underwood were from, which were my MMA coaches when I got out. And so they knew Aaron. It was just crazy.
That's wild.
Aaron was just a tough guy. Beautiful wife, beautiful family. It was from Team 1, came over to trade at, had some good experience under his belt, and was a very high-level professional at everything that we did. Was an incredible breacher. His nickname was Chainsaw, and I figured it was because he was so good at using the chainsaw for breaching doors and getting in and everything. And then I learned on a trip together that his nickname was Chainsaw because he sounds like a chainsaw when he's sleeping because of how bad his snoring is. So I learned that one, and
you had some firsthand experience with that.
Firsthand experience, being in the same small little room, I was like, oh my gosh! And it was one of those things where if you were on the road with Aaron in the same room, you better fall asleep first. And there was many nights that I was not sleeping, and I never liked to sleep with ear protection in because you lose situational awareness of what's happening, and we're all like just stressed out, engaged, even at that training command, after the combat deployments, and, even though we're in the States and we're at a SEAL training facility, you still but that was one of the first times I was like, oh, I have to sleep with ear protection in and put a fan right next to the bed because it's bad.
Yeah, dude.
It's bad. But yeah, Aaron, his just mindset for training was very inspiring. It was always like, how do we make things better? Was very in tune with what we taught, would study reports from things that were happening overseas and implement those things back into the training that we were doing. And I remember him and we were working out together, and he made a comment about the style of training that we were doing. And because it was just this hybrid from what guys typically had done, because for a while, guys in the teams, we didn't have guidance on how to train properly like athletes. Guys would just do what worked for them, and guys are trying to get big and strong while also be able to run and swim, which if you don't have guidance on doing it, that's very difficult and hard to be able to do properly.
Yeah.
And he found this program, CrossFit Football.
Okay.
And, CrossFit had been out, and it was like CrossFit Football. I can't remember the name of the guy who started it, but this guy was a big, strong, athletic guy. And I remember it was this app, and, it wasn't even an app. You'd have to go to the website on your phone and get the daily workout. And we were following that and training together. And I remember he made this comment. He goes, I'm not training to look good anymore. He goes, I have a smoking hot wife. He goes, I'm training for war. And I just remember the way he said that with that conviction of, like, I don't care how I look. And I'm not saying he was like a sloppy looking guy.
Right.
But guys, for the most part, would train to look good.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
He doesn't care about his gym muscles anymore.
Nope. No. It was all about functionality and being able to do the job at the highest level, to train for war. And I remember, I hope I don't screw up this quote, but I remember we were talking about, you know, just life and just him having kids and just from what I had seen in Ramadi and what guys were enduring at that time overseas, and, you know, just hearing about the chaos and knowing, you know, we were trying to make our way out to the East Coast as well, and training for that and just training for our job to be capable, and, you know, just preparing for war every single day, preparing for war. And I can't remember exactly what I said, but it was something along the lines of like, hey, you know, you're married with kids, you know, does that change the way you think about things? And he said, this nation wasn't founded. No, this nation was not, it was either, this nation was founded. Damn it, man. It was along the lines of how this nation was founded wasn't by fatherless children. Whether it was or I should have looked it up beforehand, but you know, if you know the quote I'm talking about, drop it in the comments on YouTube, please, or social media. But it was just this thought process and mindset that he had of just like, hey man, like our nation needs men like us to answer the call. And if it's my time, it's my time. Knowing that there are kids that will be raised without their fathers because of them answering the call of their nation. And Aaron was a very strong believer, like all these guys, you know, were very strong believers. Loved the Lord, loved our nation, loved his wife, loved his family, but also knew that he was doing what he was called to do. And, you know, Aaron and I, like I said, we're at training together, and, you know, he went on and, you know, made it through Green Team and went to that squadron and was a phenomenal performer there as well. Phenomenal performer. One of his best friends, which we'll talk about later, was Brad Kavner. And because of Aaron's friendship with Brad, that's how I became close friends with Brad as well. But yeah, Aaron, you know, was a very, very, very hard worker, a very tough guy. Was always there to protect his friends, his family, and gave everything he did his 100% attention and focus. JT Tumlinson was also on that helicopter crash. Was at Trade for a little bit.
If I can interrupt, how many guys were on that helicopter?
We say 31 souls because we considered the American working dog that was killed a soul as well.
Good grief, dude.
Yeah, so you had the crew, and then that, that group, the squadron. No, not the whole squadron, but that task unit.
I know a little about this story. I've got some of the books about Extortion 17. They're on my reading list for the next year, man. And I don't want to take away from the stories you're about to share about JT, but how often is it that there are that many guys from the same task unit or something that are traveling in a helicopter like this? Or
not often.
Like
it's not ideal, but there was a unit that was in distress, and so they put as many people in there and headed that way. And the helicopter was shot down from an enemy RPG.
Good grief.
Yeah. So, horrible situation. The whole thing has had a lot of scrutiny in regards to.
Oh, for sure. Like there are like 5 or 6 books.
Yeah.
That have been written just about this.
Yeah. JT was also a physical phenom and stud. I mean, if you're going to be out of that command, you have to be.
Mm-hmm.
There's no middle ground on that.
Yeah.
Like, you're operating at the highest level in all things that you do, and you should. Then that unit out there is unreal. What they do is unreal. I have the utmost respect for that command and every single person there. I mean, they are just special humans, man. And, for a very long time, I always had the regret of never making it to that command, but God has his plans for all of us. And that was hard for me to understand for a long time. But yeah, JT was, I remember when he was like getting ready, to go to that command, he was really focused on like kind of doing like triathlete type of trainings. And because for him, that was what he enjoyed and what was needed. High level operator. He was a good old boy.
Yeah. He
is also, funny story, the only person I have ever seen get hit on while he was asleep at the bar. JT was a big, strong, good-looking guy.
It sounds like it.
So was Aaron. So was Darrik. So all these guys were.
Yeah.
Darrik, we'd always joke and call him a pretty boy because of like how handsome he was, and it would piss him off.
No doubt.
It would piss him off. But JT the same way. But it didn't piss off JT. He'd be like, "Yep," And we joke about that. JT had an off button. If he had any alcoholic beverages in him and sat down, he was falling asleep.
Yeah, it was just done.
And so he was at a bar, had the wall like right next to him.
Right.
And was just sitting there and had his sunglasses on inside the bar.
As you do.
And because why would you not?
Yep.
Oh, wait, you do that because you're going to go to sleep. And JT.
He came in with a game plan.
Yeah, he knew what was going on. And he's sitting there asleep with sunglasses and just beautiful. These two beautiful women like come up to him and they're like trying to talk to him, get his attention. And obviously he's not acknowledging them or talking back or even doing anything. And they walk off all pissed off.
Yeah.
Because he ignored them while he was asleep. And guys are like, dude.
Had no clue they were even there.
Just had game while he was asleep.
There's got to be like, tell me there's camera footage of that. Like somebody pulled out their iPhone and just like started recording it.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't know if there is, but just that would be pretty epic. He had a dog that he absolutely loved, Brown Lab, and there's a heartbreaking picture of his dog like laying next to his casket.
Oh man.
Yeah, at the service. So, but yeah, JT, like all those guys, I mean, he took the job extremely serious. I mean, there's a common thread here.
Yeah.
All these guys were high-level performers, did what they did at the highest level, loved life, loved their teammates, loved their nation, loved the SEAL teams, put the teams above everything. And their families knew that. And like Aaron's wife knew that Aaron's number one priority when he was in the teams was the team so that he could do what he did at a high level.
Right.
But yeah, I always, Aaron was just such a funny, good old country boy. And then Darrik, from Northern California, JT from Iowa. And so, very different personalities, but all very similar.
Yeah.
Very similar. And JT was the same way when he was at that command. He would, he'd send me text messages or emails about, the training that they were doing. I mean, not like the details of the classified stuff, but hey, this is what you need to be thinking about. This is what you need to be doing. Like, hey, you guys need to be thinking about these things at the training command to change it, right? Whether it was from tactics or like from a physical standard. So, just an awesome guy. And I just love hearing that story. Like, who gets hit on while they're asleep at the bar?
The one guy in history.
JT. JT.
That's amazing, man. You mentioned just what studs they are, but you don't make it into the SEALs by accident.
No. It's a choice you make.
Yeah.
Nobody says, hey, you're going to become a SEAL.
Right.
It doesn't happen that way.
No.
You have to choose, like, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to sacrifice. This is going to be my number one focus for everything that I do. And then the guys that stay at the top, they maintain that mindset while they're going through training, while they're out of command, doing training to prepare for war, while they're overseas, while they're wanting to go to a different command. It's just, that's the theme is like, hey, it's a daily mindset shift. That's one of the things I talk about when I work with companies doing what I do at Echelon Front is the mindset shift that's required every single day for you to be able to perform at the highest level and understanding and maintaining alignment of like what your mission is, because our mission is always going to shift and change. And you have to set, okay, what's my mission today? What's my mission this week? Like, what am I working on short term, long term? And do the daily things align with the long term goals. And these guys were meticulous about it.
Yeah, you know, so you don't make it into the SEALs by accident, and you've got to have an intention with what you're doing. And with the names we've read so far and the ones that we're going to get to, like, you also don't make it onto a list to be memorialized by accident either. It's because you chose to put yourself in harm's way for something greater than yourself. And that's a pretty incredible thing. And, you know, talking about these three guys in particular, it sounds like they were ecstatic about the choice that they made.
Yeah, they loved what they did, and they understood the risk, the inherent risk of what they were doing, especially when you go to that command and operate there. So, next, Chris Kyle. He was murdered on February 2nd, 2013. I had just started my transition out, and I remember I was on a date night with Amanda, and back in South Haven, Mississippi, and I remember getting the phone call. And I'd gotten a text message from somebody earlier that said, hey, man, I think something happened to Chris. Do you know what's going on? This person wasn't in the SEAL teams or the military. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Yeah. And part of me was like, how would you know this? That's a little weird. And then all of a sudden I got a call from Kevin Lace. And when I saw him calling, just my heart sank. And I walked outside, answered it, and I was like, hey, man, how are you? And just that response on the other end told me everything I needed.
Yeah, that hesitation.
Yeah. And then just, hey, man. And then he told me that Chris had been murdered. And I just started crying. You know, I was out in the parking lot. And I couldn't figure out why, like what happened. And so I'm asking all these questions, and, you know, he gave me a brief overview. This is kind of what we know. We don't know the details. And then it went to like rage. Like I was so mad. I was like, okay, where did this happen? What county? You know, like, and
how close am I to this?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Can I go get arrested in that county and end up like there? And a few guys had like said that and thought the same thing. And I just, you know, I told Amanda, and there was other guys that were in town for training. And I knew they were at a different bar hanging out. And like I said, Amanda and I were doing our date night, and we went over there and I told them, and it was the same reaction. Like a couple guys started crying, and they're just like, what? Like, hold on, this doesn't make sense. And they immediately get on their phones. They're calling back to the command, because it's like, okay, hey, this happened. What are we doing next? Like, hey, there's now protocols that we have to start doing to take care of the family and, you know, start figuring out what's going to happen. And Southwest Airlines, you know, they rogered up, and all of their employees donated their free flight vouchers.
Yeah, their standby vouchers.
Their standby vouchers, so that every team guy in their family, whoever needed flights, were going to be taken care of.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah. You know, Chris was a funny guy. Chris had his demons, like everybody does. You know, Chris had his good, Chris had his bad. The things I remember about Chris is just, he was a practical joker.
Yeah.
And, you know, he loved to come up behind me and slap me in the back of the head, because he knew how mad it made me. Like instant rage. I'm ready to fight.
Yeah.
Turn around.
Noted.
And it's just Chris. Yeah. Just sitting there laughing. And there's a few times we got into like little playful like wrestling matches, and you know, but he was, you know, he was a good old boy from Texas. And one time I got him back by stealing his hat, his like hat that he loved. And like we were like nose to nose when he found out it was me, like ready to fight. And I just remember going, man, this is going to hurt for both of us. Like, this is going to hurt for both of us. Yeah, he was an expert in his craft. He's a phenomenal sniper. You know, was very professional when it came to his craft. And, you know, he was big on helping veterans. And, you know, unfortunately, the guy that murdered him had some major issues going on. You know, killed him and his buddy Chad, and at the shooting range, and stole Chris's truck. Yeah, it's just horrible. Now, it's crazy the way the world works. Is one of the guys that I trained jiu-jitsu with, older gentleman, him and his partner responded to that call. He was there. He was a former Texas Ranger. He's actually.
Really?
Yeah, I'm working to get him on the podcast with us.
That'd be awesome.
He's in the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame.
Right next to Walker.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe he's not coming on the podcast.
Yeah, I don't think Walker is coming on the podcast. But yeah, my buddy Ron, who trains with us at Double Five in Highlands Village, was actually one of the officers that responded to that call.
Wow.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, we did a pretty in-depth, had a pretty in-depth discussion back on episode 28 about your and Chris's relationship, and talked a little bit about your cameo appearances in American Sniper, which are pretty fun, and then also, since then, I've read Taya's book about what it was like for her and walking through and working through all of that stuff, and just the guy that Chris was for their family, and it's pretty stellar to get her perspective on things, and just like what, particularly like at the end of, he's passed on, but seeing the community, the SEAL community and the community here in North Texas just come together at his memorial service, which we didn't get into it on episode 28, but like you spoke at that memorial service, and
I read the letter. I read a letter.
Yeah. So who wrote that letter, and how did you end up speaking at Chris's memorial service?
It was a letter his parents wrote, and Taya asked me to read it, and I did not want to read it, but what you want to do and what you should do are two different things often in life. And yeah, it was just crazy. I just remember it being here at Cowboy Stadium.
Yeah. And
just how big of a thing it had turned into because of Chris and his reputation and his legacy. And, it's unfortunate. There's a lot of drama online about Taya and the family and everything else like that. And I often get asked like my opinion on that. And my opinion is, that family has endured a lot. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I know Chris would love would to see union and alignment between his family members.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking that his parents and his brother don't get to see his kids.
Yeah.
Because of that separation. And that's exactly what the enemy wants. He wants that separation, and it's something I think about and I pray about, is so that they can find healing, and that his parents and his brother can be a part of those kids' life. Because that's exactly what Chris would want. Like, no doubt. And so it's just, the whole thing is just unfortunate, Yeah. Yeah. So next is Brad Kavner. Was also one of my very close best friends in the SEAL teams. One of my roommates was the last guy that I lived with in the SEAL teams before I moved out, got out and moved to Mississippi. He was actually killed in a training accident on June 24th, 2014. The day after Aaron Vaughn's birthday, his best friend.
Wow.
Yeah. So Brad had come back from his fifth combat deployment. It was a pretty rough deployment. It was about 9 months, I believe, 8-9 months in Afghanistan. It was a hard deployment for those guys. And
was he there with Andy Arbito? Because Half Face has a Kavner knife that they do in the family.
So they were at Team 1 together.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So that's how Andy, and I can say his name, Dan Luna, he's out. He's active on social media. Dan Luna is an incredible human.
Yeah.
Was an older guy to all these guys in the SEAL teams. Ryan Bates, Brandon Cruz, a few other guys I won't mention because they're still in. But yeah, Brad, Aaron, Andy, Dan Luna, Ryan Bates, they were all really close.
Yeah.
And Brad Kavner, they would joke, they call him the Coronado Cowboy, because he seemed like, legitimately, when I first met him, I thought he was from Tennessee, like Aaron. Mm-hmm. Nope, grew up in Coronado his whole life. His dad was a police officer in Coronado, retired, and then worked at NSW at the command.
Yeah.
His dad is an incredible human being. His mom is incredible. His brothers are just great humans. I remember his brothers were in high school when Brad and I lived together, and we would go watch them play football. And he would be taking notes. He'd have his little notebook, a little Right in the Rain notebook that we use in the teams. He would have one just for his brothers' football games. And we'd go and he'd watch and he'd take notes, and he'd debrief his brothers like after the game, real time. Like, hey, you missed this block. Hey, your feet were here. They should have been there. I mean, he was so meticulous about everything. And just high performer. He would, and he took training very serious and what we did very serious. I mean, he was just a funny guy, hard worker. It would be awesome. We'd be at Danny's, and some songs would come on that he'd love, and he'd just start playing the air guitar. And sometimes he'd jump up on the bar and be doing that up there with a few other guys, and just he'd hit this mode, and all of a sudden it was just like, fun Brad's out.
Yeah.
But they come back from that deployment, and he had made E7. He made chief, got selected and made chief, and so the command, to the best of my knowledge, the command was like, hey, we need somebody to go to this school, a static line jump master school, which is a school that guys don't really like to go to because very often we're not doing static line jumps, right. But it's a qual that's needed in case you need to do it.
Yeah. It happened a lot in World War II.
Yes.
A lot of static line jumps in World War II.
Yeah. Not so much in Iraq and Afghanistan, but whatever. It's still a qualification that's needed because we do static line jumps and we can, right? It's one of those things. And if you're going to do that, you need guys qualified for your units to be.
Because it's a pretty dangerous jump.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And it's a legitimate school that it's very difficult to go through. But the command was like, hey, we got to send somebody. And these guys just came back from deployment, like a gnarly deployment. And I love when I work with companies at Echelon Front. They're like, you don't understand the bureaucracy that we have to deal with here. And I just pause and I look at them and I ask them, have you ever heard of the U.S. Navy? Like, I promise you.
We were a government entity.
Yeah, I'm aware of the bureaucracy that can happen in large organizations, and even small, right? And Brad was not going to be on the list that had to go to that because of his seniority. Yeah. They're going to send a new guy or somebody on a second platoon, but all of those guys had families that they wanted to go spend leave with, and they were going to miss leave to have to go to school. And that's just part of it. That's part of, unfortunately, the teams. It's like, hey, come back.
Gig.
Hey, you get part of the gig. It's part of the job. And Brad rogered up. He was like, I'll go. I want my guys to be able to go home with their families and have leave. Brad lived in Coronado. The place that we rented in Coronado was from an old Vietnam SEAL that owned the building.
That's cool. Had
4 units, and so we rented a little 2-bedroom from him. It was awesome. We would ride our bikes into work, which was really cool to be able to do. And so Brad was like, no, I'll go, because his parents lived like less than 10 houses away.
Yeah.
Just like very close to where we're at. And so he knew he'd be able to see his brothers and his mom and his dad. And so he went to that school, and they were inside the airplane, and guys were there, whatever they're doing inside the plane, getting guys lined up, ready to jump or whatever. And the reserve on his unit malfunctioned and deployed, and which normally wouldn't be a big deal, but the door was open, and that door, creates a vacuum. Mm-hmm. And that happened, and it deployed out, so it shoots out. So the reserve is on the front of your body, right? You have your main on your back, the reserve is on the front for static line. And so it shoots out, and and he's like scrambling. This is what I'm hearing from guys that were in there, was scrambling to like collapse it and like collect it and pull it in. And it got to the door, caught the wind obviously on the outside, and ripped him out the airplane. And from what I've been told, when that happened, as it ripped him out of the airplane, just from the force of it ripping him out and then him hitting the door as he got sucked out, it broke his neck. So from what we know and can assume on that, he was killed, didn't suffer, but then he burned, and then obviously he burned in on that. And I remember I was leaving work that day, and I got a call from Carlos Mendez, who was in the teams who was at Team 1 with those guys, and that's how I knew them well. And I was all excited to hear from Carlos. I'm walking out. I remember I'm literally walking out to my car.
Yeah, Carlos is a pretty upbeat, like
Yeah.
happy guy.
Yep.
We've got to hang out with him.
And I was like, hey, bud, how are you? And he was just like, hey, man. And it was that same hey, man. Like I just knew. And I was like, what happened? And he goes, Brad was killed. And it didn't make sense to me. Like, he's not overseas. What do you mean? Like, they should be on leave right now. And he told me the whole story. And I started crying, and I was just so pissed off. And I remember, finishing my call with him. I walked back into work, and my boss was leaving. One of the owners was leaving, Jeff Rose, incredible human. Helped me a lot when I got out and was transitioned. I walk up to Jeff and I said, hey, my roommate, one of my best friends, just was killed in training, just came back from deployment. I'm probably going to need to head to San Diego soon. And he said, hey, whatever you need from me, let me know. And, him being the good boss, he goes, I think you have some clients out in San Diego that you need to go check in on and make sure everything's good with them. Meaning, we're going to cover your trip. We got your back. And I just remember I shook his hand and gave him like a hug, and he's like, hey, let me know if you need anything. And I called Amanda, and I told her that Brad had been killed, and that I was on my way home. And she was like, okay. And I come home, and again, this is not the answer, but at the time, this was the answer for me. She had a bottle of Jameson and some ginger ale with some limes, and made myself a drink. We sat and we talked and made some more drinks, and had dinner with the kids and put the kids to bed, and we watched a TV series, and I just kept drinking that night. What I didn't know is that night Amanda had planned on serving me my divorce papers. And she didn't. And she was so loving and compassionate to me. And she did the right thing. She took care of me. On what I would imagine was a very, very difficult day for her, because she had already made the decision that was the day she was going to end our marriage. And rightfully so. This is not an attack on Amanda at all. It was bad between us. I had caused so much separation, so much just pain in our marriage. And she was able to put all that aside and just love me and comfort me and support me with that trip, with burying another friend, and she held on to that for months.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was Brad. I mean, they were all tough ones. Brad was a hard one because we were together when we found out about Aaron, JT, Darrik, and all those guys. And it was actually that night that we found out about the guys of Extortion 17 that he had mentioned. He goes, hey man, like, I got an extra bedroom. Like, maybe, if you want to be roommates, let me know.
Yeah. And
I didn't do it right away, but that was one of those things that I did end up doing, and living with Brad was awesome. That helped my transition out, just being with a guy like him, and, training hard and working hard. And, he was an incredible human.
We mentioned that, Half Face Blades has a blade called the Kavner. They got a folder and a fixed blade. And anybody who purchases one of those, that there is a percentage of that goes to the foundation that his family started, and that they use that gift that's given to them as by Half Face to distribute to different charities that help out veterans and help out Navy SEALs. And that's kind of given it at their discretion as a way to memorialize him. And that's a beautiful piece. You know, when we were picking out your, for our 1 year anniversary, when I was talking to Kelsey over at Half Face Blades, we were trying to figure out like, all right, which one of these knives do you not have? And, you know, she was talking to Andy and, you know, they're going back, and he was like, no, JP's got, both the calf blades that they, you know, that you guys were close. And that was the first time that I had, you know, found out anything about him. And then as we were talking about it after, episode 52, getting to hear a little bit about y'all's relationship and stuff has been pretty cool, man. He sounds like he was not just an incredible guy, but like the whole, retrospective of like what was going on with Amanda, what was happening in y'all's relationship. And it also speaks to how much, you know, we've talked a lot about how incredible our wives are and the things that they've done for us. But it's interesting to me looking back at, you know, these types of stories and seeing, you know, where you guys are at now, but listening to, you know, you talk about, how y'all reconciled your relationship, got remarried, and all of those things. Yeah. You know, that note she passed you that's like, I still love you. Yeah. Yeah. And whether you folded it up or crumpled it up is immaterial. But that's evident all the way back. Yeah. You know, because I don't think you can put all of that stuff aside unless you still really, truly love that person, no matter how bad things have gotten. Yeah, because, I mean, she knew how fragile I was. Yeah. And if she actually hated me, she wouldn't have cared what would have happened to me. Oh, yeah. So he had a quote that was on his plaque that he would say, to those before us, to those amongst us, to those we will see on the other side, Lord, let me not prove unworthy of my brothers. So... And Brad was also, he's the first person that was close to you that was killed in training. Yeah. How much different was that to process than the guys who, you know, and the one previous to this, you know, I'm looking at these in order, you know, everybody else prior to that was either killed in action or with from complications of wounds that they got in service, right? With Ryan Job. Kyle being murdered, you know, Brad being killed in training. How much different were those two to process than everything else? It was, you know, Chris was really hard to process, but people get murdered. Right. You know. Yeah. Which I'm not trying to say that and sound heartless, like but hear it happens. That people all the time. People get murdered, right? Yeah. But for somebody to die in training when they shouldn't have been there, and then you come to find out that there was allegedly reports of this malfunction happening, and they still like hadn't addressed it and fixed it. And then just a guy who's just an incredible human, who was selfless, who was there so his guys could go on leave and be with their families, comes back from a hard combat deployment, and like, this is how he dies. It's very, very frustrating. Yeah. Very frustrating. That one was harder to process because of those things. You know, combat sucks, hard to process, but you get it. Like, it's combat. You know these things are going to happen. But it shouldn't happen in training. Yeah. It shouldn't. So, next one is Chuck Keating. I actually knew Chuck because put him through training. Never served with him in a platoon, but like, just from putting him through training, the impact that he had on the guys around him, you know, always had a big smile on his face, loved life to the fullest. He was just an incredible human, hard worker, allegedly had a skateboard, what do they call it? Half pipe? Oh, yeah. Built overseas.
and was getting after it in the half pipe with full kit on.
What a guy, man. That's awesome.
Yeah. I remember I talked to Chuck. I was actually out in San Diego for a work trip and saw him and the guys right before they deployed, and ended up out of the bar with those guys having drinks. And I just remember sitting having a beer, talking with them, and which is cool because like he's there with his guys and they're all hanging out. And I knew some of the guys that were in the platoon and task unit and other guys that were out with those guys, because it's like, hey, these guys are going out the door, like we're gonna go hang out and have drinks and just spend time with your guys. And I remember being able to be a part of that time with those guys. And I just remember him sitting down with me and just talking, just asking about what was it like outside the teams, what was I doing, like how were things going, and it was very genuine with his questions. And that's the thing with Chuck, was he was very genuine with wanting to know how people were, with talking with them, having a relationship with them, being a friend, being a good teammate. And he as they say, ran into the fray. And if you want more on the operation and what happened to Chuck, I mean, there's a lot of articles, a lot of open source things, but he ran into the fight with this, and as they said, died with a smile on his face. Doing what frogmen do, knowing the inherent risk, running forward, running towards danger, towards the fight. And, it's just one of the things I think about when you hear those reports, where guys are like running in the opposite direction and he's like leading the charge in there with other forces. He's just a very unique human that takes a unique person. Wasn't worried about the risk to him, knew that there was a fight and that if they didn't go into the fight, that things could have turned out pretty bad. And I remember I was actually teaching long range shooting. I was helping one of my buddy's courses, and I remember getting the phone call and just hearing about that, and I was just like, you've got to be kidding me, man. Like, this guy loved life, like all of them, loved life, made everything in life to be a good thing, lived life to the fullest. And it's just, again, another heartbreaking phone call that you get. So I always laugh when I would see pictures and videos of him on the half pipe overseas in kit, just enjoying his downtime.
Yeah.
And the leadership's like all stressed out, like, bro, you hurt yourself or you hurt something, like this is gonna be a problem. But no, still had that half pipe.
That's rad, man.
Yeah.
So between these next two, a lot happens in the life of JP Dinnell.
Yeah.
Then this next year and a half, you start with Echelon Front.
Yep. At the end of 2016, went to the very first muster. Like I've shared before, the first 5 minutes of watching Jocko and Leif at the muster, I was all in and wanted just to be able to help, be a part of it. Saw the impact. I already knew the impact because of reading Extreme Ownership and what it had done for Amanda and I and our family and restoring our marriage and helping me shift my mindset back to where it needed to be. But there was still like stuff missing. Mm-hmm. And then, I'm reaching out to Jocko and asking him if he needs help, if there's anything him and Leif need help with. And, I've shared this before, and Leif was like, what? So it's crazy what the human mind will do when you're not in the right mindset.
Yeah.
I had in my mind convinced myself that Leif was mad at me or didn't like me anymore. I don't know why. And I remember talking to Jocko and mentioned that. And I said, hey, I don't, the last time.
Was this like after episode 46 or like prior to?
No, this is before the podcast.
Oh, okay.
This is before me coming out to the muster. Like when Jocko was telling me about the muster and me being able to come out and check it out and see what they had going on, I kind of was like, hey, by the way, like, I don't know why, but I don't know. I think Leif might be mad at me or there's something, like, I'm not sure what was going on. And Leif was like, Jocko was like, bro, that's crazy. Leif loves you. Leif cares about you. There is nothing wrong between you and Leif. And I was like, all right, cool. For whatever reason in my mind, I had convinced myself that Leif was pissed off at me.
Like, did you guys had a weird interaction or anything? Like,
Nope.
Like, and the last
interaction was when Chris had been murdered.
Okay, yeah. So like Chris's funeral was the last time that you saw Leif.
Yeah.
And nothing weird happened there.
Nope.
Or anything.
Nope.
Had you guys talked at all since then?
No.
So somewhere in that 3-year period, you've convinced yourself like this.
Yeah.
My brother just doesn't like me anymore.
I did something wrong.
Yeah. Wild.
And I remember Jocko going, yeah, that's not the case.
Yeah.
Like, not even close. Leif loves you. He cares about you. And then I went out to the muster, and when I saw Leif, the first thing I see Leif, big smile, big hug. How have you been? You know, and it was, I just remember that shift in my mind. I'm like, why? What caused me to think that way?
Yeah.
And I think what it was the guilt that I was still holding on to for getting out. Mm-hmm. And not being around when other guys had been injured or killed, and just that guilt that I held almost every day, just that feeling of you quit the community, you left your guys, and for whatever reason, I that would creep in and create separation, which now I understand that those were legitimate little lies from the devil to create separation. And so I go to the muster. It's incredible. Jocko has me on the podcast, episode 46 of Jocko's podcast. And then, you know, Leif took lead on bringing me on board Echelon Front, and everything, you know, from then on, which has been awesome.
But that whole journey started with a text message from the
Seth.
guy we're about to talk about.
Yeah. And Seth reached out to Jocko, which I never knew about until Jocko and I talked about it on one of the other podcasts that we did. And Seth had told Jocko that he thought I needed some help, needed a new mission, something to do. And that's what allowed me to come be a part of that first muster and come on board Echelon Front. And, Seth Stone was killed September 30th, 2017. That morning, I was actually talking with him. We were messaging back and forth, and I knew he was going up and doing some base jumps. And, he was a big jumper. And which is funny is Seth was always terrified of jumping. And Seth had, I learned from his brother, Alex, a list of fears, things that bothered him, that he was committed to doing those things.
Just overcoming everything on the list.
Yep.
Yeah.
And one of them was jumping. I had pictures of me and my buddy, who was our corpsman I was telling you about, and Seth in an airplane, and my corpsman and I were like making like funny faces and like joking around to try to like help Seth relax a little bit because we were doing a static line water jump, and he was just.
That sounds like the worst of the jumps.
Well, the landing doesn't hurt, but the possibility of drowning with your gear, if your flotation isn't properly set up, and that parachute, trying to recover that parachute in the water is also.
And if I'm not mistaken, like when you guys do a static line jump, you don't have a ton of control over the parachutes. Like it's not like when you're skydiving and you've got a couple of things where you can kind of land yourself. Like the static line jump parachute is just like you're going to land wherever you
go where the wind's taking you.
Yeah.
And you can do a little bit with the risers, but it's not much.
Yeah.
That's why that static line jump master school is so critical and intense. But yeah, Seth hated jumping. And so he put it on his list and overcame that and was jumping all the time.
Yeah.
And he was doing base jumps off of bridges, base jumps out of hot air balloons. Seth was my big brother. Seth helped me become a young man in the SEAL teams. We went through SQT together with Leif, Andrew Paul, a handful of other guys I've talked about. And I mean, he was just an incredible leader. He was a loving leader. He was selfless, put the guys above himself all the time, was committed to taking care of his guys. His family knew that. His brother Alex, who I'm very close with now, has shared with me a lot of stories of what Seth had told him and shared with him and asked him to do to take care of the guys. And, I remember we were going through SQT, and I was looking through pictures not too long ago that I have it in the storage unit, and it was in our squad in SQT. I was always with Seth, and it was like Seth and Andrew Paul was in there, Scott Stout, a few other guys, and just looking at these pictures of us up in Kodiak, Alaska, doing river crossings and over the beaches and building up our hide sites and doing, the different types of training out in the desert and up in the, the foothills of California and all, just all these different types of training. I have these pictures, and I'm so thankful that I had taken all those pictures over the years to have those memories. But I remember when we graduated from SQT, and they're announcing where guys were going, like, hey, because you knew, okay, hey, you're going to SEAL Team 3. When I remember we were up in Kodiak, Alaska, that's when I found out where I was going, and Seth was going there as well, and Leif was going to Team 5, and I was like, all right, cool. But you didn't know where, like, what platoon you're going. And
right.
I remember being at the SEAL Qualification Command when the platoon chiefs all come in, and so you meet, like, the platoon chiefs. And I remember our platoon chief, it was like SEAL Team 3, Delta Platoon, and like the list of guys that were going there, and it was myself and Seth. And I was so fired up that I was going to be with Seth, because he was my big brother. He had been helping me through SQT, helping me mature, helping me become a young man in the SEAL teams. Well, SQT is not SEAL teams, but preparing, before the SEAL teams. And I remember we went across the street from SQT to the other side, from the bay side to the ocean side of the base. And we stopped by, we call it the Surf Mart. It's like a little mini mart gas station on base. And we went in there, and he grabbed some notebooks, and he gave me a notebook. And I remember him telling me, like, you should always have a notebook on you. It's good to take down notes for important things, important information. It also helps you repeat things back to people to make sure that you have alignment and, clarification. And he's like, you're going to be, we're going to be drinking through a fire hose. There's going to be a lot of information coming our way. Taking down those notes will be important. And that's something I have kept to this day.
Oh yeah.
Either I use a physical notebook or I use the notes on my phone from that just life lesson that Seth gave me.
Yeah, we can be sitting down having sushi, and you'll be like writing down the things that I'm saying. I'm like, hey, what's going on there, Dr. Dinnell?
Doctor. But that was just some good guidance from Seth. And I remember when we were, our platoon chief was walking us through the command, and there was like some codes to different doors, and I went to write it down, and Seth's like, don't write that down. I'm like, oh, okay. Yep, that actually makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to have to memorize these codes. Can't write them down. Noted. I'm going to write this down and memorize it and then burn it later. But, it's just like little things like that, just, taking care of me. And then we went out to that off-road driving school together, and it was just, more time with Seth. It just, awesome training. Seth had a signature in his email, and I know Jocko Leif talk about it, in his personal email. It was Unfrozen Caveman. He would always joke about how he's like a caveman. But man, he was so brilliant, so incredibly smart. Just unreal how smart he was, and how smart his brother is. And it's just crazy how much I see in Seth and Alex when I get to spend time with Alex, and just all those great memories. Seth he saved up. Leif always jokes about how he helped Seth out because Seth was like crashing on his couch, so that he didn't have to pay rent because he was trying to save money.
Right.
And part of the money he saved up for was to buy all of us these really nice knives that he gifted us right before deployment, and to where they each had engraved a trident in it, and then your name, and then the Roman numeral 3 for SEAL Team 3. And, I still have, I carried that knife on every combat operation. Actually, when I was cutting through some zip ties on my gear, we're trying to prep to go out on this mission real quick, and I had to rearrange some stuff. That knife was so sharp, like so incredibly sharp. It just went through those zip ties and through my finger, to where it cut down to the bone. And I went across the street to the aid station, and, they were trying to see what they could do, and they're like, hey, we're going to have to life flight you out of here for emergency surgery. because you might lose your finger.
Good grief.
And so went back, and my corpsman came back with me, told Seth, and Seth was like, all right, let's take care of JP, get him out. And, they went out, conducted an operation. Everything was good on that. And then, because of my finger being cut down to the bone and the surgery that they had to do, that's what kept me on that operation when Mikey jumped on the grenade, because, Mikey was my machine gunner, my new guy. And it was always Mikey, Benny, and I, for the most part, setting up in sniper overwatches, and like that would have been my group that I would have been with. So that's something I've always just held on to, just from not being there on that. A lot of guilt, a lot of frustration from that. But yeah, that knife that Seth gave all of us caused the reason for me not to be there. Come back from that deployment, and Seth was going to be our task unit commander, which I was all fired up about. And then that's when I got pulled and went to, because I had surgery that ended up with some nerve damage. I got pulled from the platoon and went to Buds as a Buds instructor, was not doing well there. Jocko pulled me over to trade it. Seth knew that I wasn't doing well at Buds. Jocko heard about it as well. And Seth, trying to take care of me, was trying to get me either back in the task unit or over to trade it. Jocko taking care of me like he always does. He always takes care of his guys. Found out, it was like, okay, obviously him being a Buds instructor is not a good fit. This is not what he needs. He needs more fulfillment. Brought me over to trade it. But, even when I was over there, Seth would, still check in on me. And, I remember there's a few things like I did that he didn't know about. And he's like, bro, why would you not tell me that? Because he wanted to be involved with his guys. And whether you were still working for him or not, if he was your leader, you were his guy, no matter what, even with him being at different commands. And Seth was just an incredible human when it came to loving and caring people. When he, passed away on September 30th, he had a malfunction in his rig, and did not have a reserve, and burned in. And he just lived life at like full throttle. And I remember at his memorial and funeral, how many people were there from around the world that he had met. I mean, there was people that flew in from New Zealand that he had met. Not military.
Yeah. Just people.
Just humans.
Yeah.
That loved him. And Seth, I mean, he was a wild man. I remember we were in Guam, and he loved to surf, and we were on our first deployment. We spent a little time in Guam, did some stuff from Guam, went to different nations and helped train and come back. And I remember we're in Guam, and he's like, JP, he comes up to me all intense. He's like, man, these locals want to kill me. And I'm like, what? Now, we knew there was issues with the locals, with the military there. Yeah. And Seth, found some good surf. Well, didn't make the locals weren't happy about that. Mm-hmm. Having him there. And he was just like, he wasn't dropping in on people, but he's out there surfing or whatever. And he's like, man, I think they're going to want to fight me the next time I go there.
Surfers are so territorial.
Yeah.
They're portrayed as like super cool in the movies, but it's not always that way.
No. Just like everyone's like, oh, jiu-jitsu is a gentle art. Well, if you trace back what the Gracie family did when they go do dojo storms,
Formiga talked about it. Yeah,
and literally just beat up people to show that their method was better. It's like, the gentle art. Okay, whatever. Surfer is very similar,
right?
Which whatever, cool. That's their thing. But I remember him telling me that he's like, I need you to come to the beach with me tomorrow and just be there just in case. And I'm like, all right. So I went to the beach and I just sat and watched him surf all day as I was hanging out, because I didn't surf. I wasn't gonna get on a board out there. And these waves were pretty awesome for surfers. Not awesome for someone like me who's never surfed. And if I went out there, I'm just gonna eat it the whole time. I'm not trying to go out there and get
annihilated,
washing machine in the surf zone. Not my ideal source of fun.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But we did a bunch of like free dives there. The water in Guam is beautiful, and
Yeah.
we do a lot of free dives and swimming, and on our downtime it was awesome. But yeah, I sat on the beach waiting just in case.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of good memories like that. And the last time I saw, we had an upgrade where Seth got a medal upgraded, myself and our corpsman, from that deployment. We had Bronze Stars with Valor, and I guess the Secretary of the Navy at the time was doing a review of all combat awards with the Valor on it.
Yeah.
And they reviewed ours and the write-ups and the report, and they're like, no, these. And so we all got upgraded to Silver Stars. And, seeing him there was awesome, being able to spend time with him there. And then I was able to spend time with him. He was doing a cross-country ride on his Enduro motorcycle.
Yeah.
And he came through. He was going to be coming through the Memphis area. And it was really cool being able to go have brunch with him, with Amanda and I, and spend the morning talking with them. And it was the last time I got to spend time with him. But I tried to push Seth away for a while because of that guilt.
Yeah.
As well. And he never allowed it to happen. He would always go visit the his guys at Rosecrans Cemetery, and he was always checking in on different guys. And I remember Jocko one time, I was talking to him about Seth, and he goes, Seth loves you so much. And I knew that, but I hadn't heard anybody else say that. And I just remember Jocko just reiterating that over the phone. He goes, JP, Seth loved you so much. And it was just this reminder of what good leaders do, is they take care of their people. They genuinely care about their people. And no matter what's going on, you find a way to take care of your people.
Yeah.
And Seth always did that.
So who broke the news to you about Seth?
Leif
said?
Leif called me. So like I said earlier that morning, I was messaging with Seth, and I hit him up at the very end, and I said, hey man, hit me up when you're done jumping for the day. And a few hours go by, and I know he's going to be jumping all day. I didn't think anything of it. And then I saw Leif call me, and
did you just assume it was a work call?
Yep. Yeah, just assumed it was a work call, and I answered the phone. I was actually all excited. I'm like, hey, boss, how are you? And he was just like, hey, man. I was just like, you got to be kidding me. And he told me that Seth had passed away. And I remember just processing that. And then I was really concerned for him and Jocko, because I knew how close they were. And I knew Seth was Jocko's best friend.
Yeah.
And so we had the phone call. We ran through stuff. I said, all right, who knows? Who needs to know? And I started, like, all right, hey, I'm going to reach out to these guys. And I started.
You basically took your part of the list and started calling people.
Yeah. And just ran through the guys from Delta Platoon and just started reaching out to all those guys. And every guy had the same reaction. It was just pure devastation. I remember I tried to call Jocko a few times a day and didn't get through, and I understand why, for sure.
Because he's processing losing his, his best friend, and then it's always sounded like, though he's never been, Jocko's never been completely forthcoming with it, but it always sounded like that there was something that they were going to do, that they had plans, for when Seth retired.
Seth was going to come to Echelon Front.
Yeah.
And, that never got to come to fruition.
Yeah.
And I believe...
Because he would have been pretty close.
Oh, yeah.
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 That, I mean, that was getting ready to happen within a couple of years. At least.
I think less than 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's Seth was extreme. Losing all these guys was hard. Seth was, just devastating because of the relationship that had, it was just different. It was a different relationship. But, Seth's legacy continues to live on. And, like I said, because of the close relationship that I have with his brother and his brother's wife, and Amanda and I have with, the four of us, his brother Alex texted me in April, and he said, "I really appreciate you, brother. If there's anything you need, I am here for you. Seth made me promise to be there for his brothers in the event he made it to heaven first. Please consider me your servant." That's legacy.
Yeah.
That's a true legacy, because even with him being gone, he's still taking care of his guys.
100%.
And, that's who Seth was.
Yeah. When we started this podcast, it came out on the anniversary of Mikey Monsoor's passing.
Yeah.
And, when you look at those dates, they're 11 years apart, but it's the day right after. Mm-hmm. And I know listening to you guys talk at the muster, you talk about both of those guys and hold them in incredibly high esteem. It always feels like, particularly when you and Jocko and Leif talk about Seth, mm-hmm. that he was part of EF.
Yeah.
That's one of the things, and I've talked to other people. I've talked to Father Stokes about this. I've talked with the Montgomerys about this, who've been to several musters also, and we talked about Lauren Newton, who's been to a few musters now, and FTXs, and obviously some of the guys that are on the team, Josh and Cody, that you talk about his legacy living on. The way that you guys talk about him, the legacy that y'all bring to the muster about what he did and how influential he was in TU Bruiser, but also in forming the principles, the laws of combat and executing those things on the battlefield. It kind of feels like he was the other guy in the room at Echelon Front, even though, most of us didn't get to meet him. And a few months ago, I stumbled across his Instagram and just scrolled through some videos of stuff of him singing, and playing ukulele, which was pretty good. Dude, the guy had an incredible voice, super creative, and just an absolutely incredible writer. Yeah, so good. And you talk about all of that stuff. One of the things that stunned me, and I asked you about this, I was like, how big was he? Because there's some pictures of him next to guys who I've got like a good gauge of what size they are.
Yeah.
Seth seems like a larger than life personality, but he also was just a huge dude.
Yeah.
In general, and to have that kind of frame, to command that kind of respect, and to also have the heart that he did. And like we've talked about, again, for a guy that I've never met and won't meet this side of heaven, the way that he's impacted my life, because if not for Seth, then we never make the connection.
Yeah. Because
you're not here and all of that stuff. The amount of lives that guy has touched, even posthumously.
Yeah.
And situations and stuff he's changed is pretty incredible, man.
Well, I'm going to show you this picture. He's, in the picture, it's Ryan Job, O'Corman, myself, Chris Kyle, Seth, and a few other guys. Jimmy May, who was also on Jocko's podcast, does Beyond the Brotherhood.
Yeah, Jimmy May was he the one that pulled Mikey out?
Yeah, they responded to.
He responded to that.
Yeah, they were the other Overwatch, and then Bob Holland, who's on Jocko's podcast. Bob's a big guy. Jimmy's a big guy. You can see Seth is on the same row, standing at the very end, and you can see how much bigger he is than those guys.
Bro. Just what an absolute unit, man.
Almost as tall as guys on the back row behind him, who are also big guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was our whole task unit at the Pentagon for the award ceremony for Mikey's Medal of Honor and some of our upgrades.
That's crazy, man.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite pictures of him. We can add this picture maybe to the YouTube, but this is him in Solder City looking out on the battlefield.
Wow.
With the War Hawk.
That's a freaking awesome haircut.
Yeah. He was, yeah, the next two, they suck. Like all of them, but for different reasons. Luke Barker passed away on October 13th, 2009 from brain cancer. Luke was not a SEAL. He was in BUDS, same BUDS class as Mike Murphy, who they did the Murph workout after. Injured his back pretty bad in training, and got pulled, but they kept him around the community as an armor. Luke loved the teams,
Yeah.
always wish he would have been able to make it through training, gotten his trident. But that wasn't in the cards for him. And, he supported our community. It was incredible what he did. He's an awesome armorer. He was an incredible wrestler, wrestled at, for the Navy. Actually grew up wrestling with Shale Sonnen.
Oh, right on, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It showed, when Luke, he was working for the VA, I believe out in Maryland, and then he had been out and he was wanting to kind of shift and do something else. So he came to the Memphis, Tennessee area to help be a coach. And so he was helping coach on the wrestling and the MMA side. Was a great coach, have a lot of pictures and videos from him, from us training together. We had fights, him being in my corner. He had coached a lot of wrestlers and fighters that went on to do incredible things in their professional career. He had a really good gift for coaching when it came to wrestling and MMA. Was a funny guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember there's times where, and he had like no filter, which was concerning at times.
Yeah.
And I remember I'd get on to him, I'm like, bro, like, you need to be a little more professional on social media. He's like, I don't have to do anything. I'm like, okay, you're right. But he was just like, the things that he would say were just hilarious. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you're like, bro, well, it did not get better when he found out he had brain cancer.
I'm sure. Yeah. Like, what do I have left to lose now?
Yeah. And, like I said, he's a great coach out in that area, and then he moved to Texas because he had an opportunity for some work at like a gun shop and a shooting range. And I mean, the guy knew weapons better than anybody else.
Yeah.
And he was definitely an asset to the SEAL teams. And, there's a lot of SEALs that showed up to his funeral, traveled in for that, and which is a legitimate fear, when he was getting closer to passing away, he would share with me, like, his fear was, dying alone. And, he had kids, and he didn't want his kids to be alone or to see his funeral with nobody there for whatever reason. Like, that was a big fear of his.
He wanted him to know he made a difference.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%, which is valid.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a selfish thing. It was about, like, he wanted his kids to know that he was loved outside of them and that he had made a difference and that people loved him and supported him. And, Luke, I remember there's a few times we'd be training and he'd pull me aside and we'd have like just one-on-one closed door training sessions, and they were intense, man. Intense. But what he was trying to do was to help you push to the next level, which you didn't realize that you had capable.
Yeah.
And I think about Luke, and when I think about that, I think about, like, that's what good coaches and good leaders do, is you push your people to a level that they can't see for themselves. And he was able to see that in people. He gave me a sticker that was on my whiteboard for a very long time at work. And I never put it on the whiteboard. I taped it to it because I always wanted that to be able to come with me. And it was a whole, like, you can't teach a heart. And I would always argue with him that you can. And it actually opened his mind to it because he was always like, nope, you either have it or you don't. And I remember like pushing back and being like, hey, this is what you do when you're coaching guys. You're teaching them like how to dig deeper and how to have heart at a deeper level. And, he would love like when like him and Jake and Zach were like pushing us in training. We did this one drill where it was, the burpee drill. And so it's every minute on the minute you're doing a burpee, but as the minutes go on, you do more and more burpees. Mm-hmm. And the goal was to be able to, at least be able to do, 17 minutes of that, because as an amateur, if you're going to fight for the belt, it would be 5 3-minute rounds. And so, 19 minutes.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so every minute you add on an additional burpee. And that was one of those things where he wanted his fighters to be able to do that before it was like fight week. And that was just brutal because that was always at the very end of class.
Naturally. It's the best time to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, be able to get to 19 minutes because that would be the total time if you fought all 3-minute rounds with the breaks. Luke was, a very loving guy as well. He moved to Texas, and then when Amanda and I moved to Texas, I reached out to him, and Texas is a big state.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, I'm in the DFW area. And I'm like, okay, that's
massive,
very large area.
Mm-hmm. Couple of hours.
Yeah. And it's just cool the way God works because the house that Amanda and I rented was 5 minutes from his apartment.
No way.
Yeah. And so, being able to be with him in we moved in 2018. He passed away at the end of 2019. So almost 2 years being close to him, and I'd get frustrated with him. And, just because he would call me random times and I'd be like, hey man, I'm working. And he'd like call me again. I'm like, but I can't talk right now. But because he just wanted to talk. And because he knew that his days were coming to an end and he just wanted to talk with his buddies and be with his friends. And so I'd call him when I get done with the gig or I'm traveling. And there's time, like almost every single time I would call him, he wouldn't answer. And he'd take a screenshot and send it to me. And he always had a picture of Fedor as my as my contact because he would call me Fedor Light.
Nice.
But yeah. And I just remember being at the hospital, that last week for him. He ended up in the hospital, and he would talk about, he just wanted to be at peace, and he loved being outside. And his brother and I took his bed out of the hospital room because it was going to be the last day before I had to leave on a work trip, and I knew that day was going to be the last day I got to see him. And so his brother and I, we broke him out of the hospital and we brought his bed outside and let him sit in the sun. And, he wasn't there. He was non-responsive. He was still alive. He was given a couple months and fought for 23 months.
Good grief.
Yeah. He would go out of his way to make people laugh. That was his thing.
Yeah.
And I remember, there's just times Amanda and I would go over there and we'd clean his apartment. And because he just physically wasn't able to. And his girlfriend would do everything she could to help him out as well.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's times Amanda, her heart. And so she was cooking meals and bringing them over to him. And he was always craving lemon lime Gatorade. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That was he said the medicine would make him crave lemon lime Gatorade. And so I remember he told me that one time, and I went to the Walmart by our place and I bought every lemon lime Gatorade that was on the shelves. I remember I had this cart just stacked
full of them. Yeah.
And I remember I was so
You really messed up their ordering system for a few weeks.
Yep, did not care. And I remember, even though I wanted to do that and I loved him, but I remember also being pissed off at him because I had to unload all those and bring him upstairs to his apartment. Yeah. I was just like, here you go, jerk.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it was sad to watch, him slowly just kind of deteriorate over time. Memory was, a really bad one for him. But he still somehow, the last text message I had from him was him just coking and joking, just telling jokes. And last voicemail I had from him, he acted like he was the guy from that TV show where they hunt the gators. Shoot him.
Oh, yeah.
Shoot him.
Like he was Troy Landry.
Yep.
Yeah, from Swamp People.
Yeah. I actually brought him to an NRA thing because he was going to be there and he wanted to meet him.
That's cool.
And so I brought him down to that in Dallas, and he was like imitating that guy to that guy's face. And I'm like, oh my gosh. What is happening right now?
Shoot him, Elizabeth.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh,
that's how
gosh.
That's how Luke talked to him the whole time.
That's how he talked to Troy?
Yes.
Oh, that's uncomfortable. That's pretty tense.
But it was amazing, and he kind of realized. And then we ended up telling him like what Luke was dealing with, and he took a picture with him and autographed some stuff.
That's cool.
For
Yeah,
Luke and
their
everything.
family is so sweet.
Yeah.
Him and his sons. We've got to work with them on a couple of ministry gigs, and man, they're just stellar people.
Yeah. So. Last one, Scott Stout, also died from cancer on July 2nd, 2021, brain cancer. He was one of my swim buddies and buds, one of my dive buddies when we were going through second phase. And I remember, he was a Navy diver before he came through buds. And I remember, thinking, I'm like, oh, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to be like paired up with you, Scott. Like, you have this background. And he said, JP, this might not be good for you because I'm going to be getting a lot of extra scrutiny and pressure from the instructors because he was already a Navy diver. And so as you're going through dive phase, I'm like, oh, you're a Navy diver. You must know everything. And I remember he was like concerned for me being his dive partner. And I was like, I don't care.
Yeah,
like,
no
cool.
factor.
Yeah. Now we did get some special attention.
Yeah.
And
No
that's the
doubt.
thing in buds. Like, if you get the attention, your swim buddy gets the attention, your dive buddy gets the attention. But, Scott was older than me, was, a mature guy, was an awesome husband, awesome father. I just remember how much he loved his kids and his wife. And, he loved them so much. And I remember we were both in rehab one time when we were in the teams. We had injuries and surgery, had injuries that caused surgery, and then we're at rehab, and him being there and him telling me his daughter was learning to play the violin. And so he was learning with her so he could do it with her. And he showed me this, and I got to listen to a video, and I believe they were playing like a Metallica song on the violin and just getting it.
That's awesome,
and he was
man.
super proud of his daughter. He ended up out on the East Coast, and I have a lot of great memories because we're also in SQT together and in the same squad with Seth and Andrew Paul and Scott and I. And I remember it was Scott, myself, and another two guys in our fire team. And I remember we were, in Alaska doing our navigation drills, and one of the FTX is a little field training exercise that we're running out there. And part of it, like, you got to stay awake. You got to be on watch throughout the night. And he wasn't being rude towards me. He wasn't being a jerk, but he just knew that I was younger and probably hadn't had to like stay up late very many times in my life overnight. And there's a big risk of you falling asleep on watch.
Yeah.
And I just remember him telling me, he's like, hey man, when you're on watch at night, one of the things, like, you have to stay awake, like, no matter what. If you get so tired that you can't stay awake, wake me up. He goes, and I'll stand watch with you, because that's what we do. And I just remember thinking, like, he's willing to sacrifice his sleep so that we can do the job. Now, I didn't doze off. I didn't think I was going to doze off. I never woke him up. But I just remember him reiterating indirectly how important it was to, like, be professional. Hey, if you're sleepy, okay, people get tired. Wake one of us up. Like you cannot fall asleep on watch. And he goes, some of the things I do, he goes, I think back to things and I create stories in my mind and I make up stories and like I'm writing a book. He goes, I'll act like I'm writing a book to keep me awake and like thinking about different things. And I was like, all right, so that's, what I would do. And I just think about things. And, but I just remember, being in the middle of the woods in Alaska, in Kodiak, Alaska, like on watch, just doing your thing and just, there was like zero chance I was going to fall asleep. Right. Zero chance because I didn't want to let Scott down. I didn't want to let Seth down. And it's so important when you're on watch that you stay awake because when people fall asleep on watch, that's when people get killed. Mm-hmm. And, Scott was a very intelligent guy. Took the time to educate himself, outside of just the regular SEAL teams and was very well spoken and, funny guy. I just remember those times in SQT and, the times in the teams at rehab and just, he's a hard worker. And, I remember I found out when he got diagnosed, he maintained a positive attitude the whole time. I have a folder in my email from letters from him because he'd send out letters, to people updating, hey, this is what's going on here, blah, blah, blah. And then when he got to the point where he was too sick, his wife took that over.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was actually up in Maine at the Origin Immersion Camp and celebrating their 10-year anniversary and got the call. And it was just, and it was, it was just, you thought he was probably kind of done getting those calls, mm-hmm. Because the last one was Luke, when I was with him. So I knew that, but the last call was for Seth, 4 years prior. And, but it's just also part of the community, I guess. When you're a part of that community and guys stay in, they're exposed to that inherent risk. And part of the inherent risk of us in SEAL teams are the things that we've been exposed to.
Yeah.
The burn pits right next to our buildings and, just all the different things that you get exposed to from the equipment that we use and the areas that you operate in and all those things.
Or things that the enemy did to you that you don't know what the fallout of them is going to be until mm-hmm. it starts to take its toll on guys.
10, 15, 20 years later.
Yeah.
The silent killers that creep in. But, as I, just kind of close this out and I think about all those guys, like the common thread is they all lived life to the fullest. They took advantage of the time that they were given. They were intentional with their day-to-day actions. They loved the people around them. They were intentional about taking care of their friends, their families, their teammates, and their loved ones. And I think that's something that all of us should strive to do every single day, is not waste the gift that God has given us. And we need to go out there and be intentional daily to live our lives to honor them. And we do that by putting in the hard work and, doing what they did for us to those that are around us.
Yeah, 100%. Well, man, before you close it out with some final thoughts, I want to talk about some of the ways that we can, or you guys can support what we're doing here at the JP Dinnell podcast. So first off, thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing on YouTube, for sharing the podcast. Those are tremendous ways that not only benefit us with a little bit of reach, but also are great ways to keep the legacy of the men that we're honoring today alive and make sure that their stories get told. So continue to do that. We appreciate it a tremendous amount. If you want to be part of the conversation, or maybe you've got a couple of those notes, maybe you've got somebody that you remembered on Memorial Day, man, we would love for you to drop their name in a comment, or if you're following us on Instagram, JP's at JP Dinnell, 2 N's, 2 L's. I'm at Lucas Pinkerton. You can go to at JP Dinnell podcast and drop something in there. Let us know. We would love to be able to just create a thread where we're honoring all of those who have made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedoms. That said, if you've been following the JP Dinnell podcast Instagram, you saw that we had some interactions. We mentioned them a couple of times with Jonathan and Ann Montgomery over at First in Nutrition. Jonathan and I have started to do the Hump Day Health Hacks.
I like it.
Yeah, where he's given a little bit of nutrition advice.
Yeah.
And if you like what you're seeing there, you can go to firstinnutrition.com/JP Pod, and they'll hook you up with 4 free weeks of nutrition help and coaching. The onboarding situation is so simple. They're actually out this week with Mama Lee out in at her retreat, helping some of those Gold Star families and some of the veterans that she's helped out, helping them get on the path with some of their stuff. It's pretty cool. They were at Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu event 21 with Marcus Buchecha.
Yeah.
Got to hang out and talk with them a little bit, and they're super awesome. We appreciate all of their support.
And what was cool is about that Hump Day hack that you guys put out. There's a guy that I trained jiu-jitsu with who he had a dream that he passed away from being unhealthy.
Yeah.
And so the next day he did a search for jiu-jitsu gyms in the area, found 555, came there. I got to meet him. Mm-hmm. We got connected through the gym. He started listening because Farmiga told him about my Instagram page and the podcast. So he started listening to the podcast, followed the JP Dinnell podcast. Ray, shout out to you for
Blue Belt Ray?
Oh yeah.
Right on, dude. I've got to roll with Blue Belt Ray a couple of times at the 6:30 class.
Does he show up in the morning? The big guy?
Yeah. He's up there way early in the mornings.
Yeah. Well, because of that interaction with you and Farmiga guiding him towards that, and I talked to him about First In just briefly, he watched that Hump Day hack and he gave feedback to Jonathan. He goes, "Hey,
that's cool.
I took this from that. Thank you."
That's awesome.
So,
man.
I mean,
yeah, it's good stuff, dude. And the way that most of us got connected is through the greatness that is Echelon Front.
Yes.
Over there, make sure that you check them out, echelonfront.com. That's Jocko, Leif, JP, Dave Burke, who's got a book coming out soon. We gotta get Dave on to talk about his book. He's got such a cool cover. It's like the book looks fast, which makes sense for a guy who's been, flying jets his entire career. Yeah. But you can check them out, echelonfront.com. Make sure that you check out also the Extreme Ownership Academy. And they've got little courses that you can take within that are pretty cool. But they have this Monday session, 1 o'clock on Mondays. Man, I can't tell you just how much value I've gotten out of that. Friar Stokes is on there. Jonathan and Ann are on there. So if you want to see some of the people we've been talking about in the podcast, you can just give them a little shout out in the chat. As well, there's different instructors that go through all of that stuff every week. So check out Echelon Front. And also, they've got some really cool gear. My favorite thing that I have from Echelon Front is the sweat-activated T-shirt, the little Aftermath shirt. And I have no idea how that technology works.
But I like it.
Yeah, so I've you do stuff with On the Path Printing, which is a print company that JP and Josh are a part of. You can check that out at On the Path Printing on Instagram. Shoot them a message if you want to do some stuff with them. So I'm looking at that and I'm trying to figure out how the sweat activated stuff works. And I got into a page that's a bunch of scientific stuff and I was like, I'm done. I just know it works when it gets wet.
It works.
Yeah,
Yep.
There you go. So work out, make it work, or wear it in the shower and you can show everybody your Aftermath pictures on Instagram. Either one of those things will work just fine. We mentioned Marcus Buchecha and the stuff we had going on with Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu. You can check that out, Jesus and Jiu-Jitsu _USA on Instagram. We are regularly doing events. Coming at the end of July, we got a big roll-a-thon that we're doing. It's a nationwide thing to help raise some support so that we can help some people that otherwise might not be able to get into some tournaments and stuff like that. Get going to create some cool new discipleship material. You see the sticker on JP's canteen. I'm looking at it. Y'all are seeing the mustard right there. Littlecattle.co. Little Cattle Co. is a Texas beef company that JP's a part of.
Yeah, dog.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I'll go with that one.
Get that beef.
Yeah, there we go. That's what I'm talking about. Now that we switch roles here, these cues are really hard.
I know.
Yeah, so, beef tallow products, beef sticks, the invigorating coffee body scrub, all of that stuff you can check out at littlecattle.co. If you want to be a wholesaler for any of that stuff, send Amanda at littlecattle.co a message. We are about to get hooked up for our Father's Day with giving the dads all the beef sticks. We've tried some other stuff. They could have the little keychain, but you know what? Why not 2 ounces of something delicious that you can chew on while you try to stay awake during my sermon? That sounds amazing. we've talked a lot about JP Jocko Leif. They've got a company called Bruiser Arms. It's at Bruiser Arms on Instagram. If you want custom gear packages, this is the place to go. If you want to know what the guys use, or maybe you need some training and you want to figure out, how do I have this particular set of skills, as maybe Liam Neeson might have said in a famous movie. These are the guys to learn from. Send them a message and figure out what you can work out for yourself, for your family, or maybe your company. Maybe this is going to be a team building thing. You know what would make a really great corporate gift? How about a little, an Amazon box opener with a little Bruiser Arms logo on it.
Half face blades.
Yeah, maybe you do something like that, or maybe, birthday present or anniversary present. Kirsten, those things are coming up. You get them a little custom gear package. It'd be pretty cool.
There you go.
And then last but not least, man, the folks that keep the podcast going, the guys and gals over at Jocko Fuel, cleanest supplements that are out there. You heard me talk about it before. I'm on a creatine kick. We talked about all the studies and stuff. New study just came out. Alzheimer's patients.
Yep.
They were giving 20 grams of creatine a day to Alzheimer's patients. And over the course of the study, they found out they were able to have better recall. Areas of their brain that were not showing functional activity started to liven back up. They started to read again. They were having the ability to recall people's names. Family members were coming in who hadn't heard their name out of their loved one's mouth in months.
That's crazy.
And then they were like, "Hey, what's up? Hey, Darrik." And it's just life-changing. And one study is not saying that it's the end-all be-all, but it has been proven to help with cognition. It's been proven to help with sleep. It's been proven to help with things like bone density and all of the things that we need in order to be functional humans. And it's one of two things that every study has shown, no matter what, that helps build and maintain muscle. That is whey protein, which you can get at jockofuel.com, and creatine. Those are the only two things that without a doubt have been proven in every scientific study that actually work. Not BCAAs, not any of this other nonsense. Your pre-workouts don't help you. Creatine, whey protein, everybody needs to be using them. And then finally, the folks that keep us outfitted.
Yep.
The guys and gals over at Origin. Immersion camp, I think for this year is already completely or almost sold out.
Almost.
So if you want to get on there, you got a couple of months to get that done. They've just come out with a bunch of new stuff, and you have on the newest, most controversially named pair of britches in the world. What are they called?
GTFO,
which stands for
Get Thy Friends Outside.
That's what I'm talking about.
We'll go with that, or Get the Family Outside.
Get the family outside for sure.
Yeah, whatever you want it to mean.
Yep, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I got the pants. They're unreal. The shorts.
Bro, Pete said, I saw the story on this, that he had a pair of shorts he wore in like 1995, and then he shows some picture of them. Not the most handsome pair of shorts that they've ever had. I'm glad they're not making them in the pastel colors that Pete was a fan of back in his college days, but they lasted him summer after summer after summer. It's like, how do we do something that good a quality? Yeah. And there it is.
It's crazy how comfortable they are, and they're a higher quality than the Nylock pants that they had, which were my favorite because they're just so comfortable all around for outdoors and travel and everything. And now these, I'm like, okay. Yeah,
that's the biggest thing. Like with some of the outdoor pants, the adventure pants, if you will, with some of those brands, like they're great. They're comfortable. They're good if you're like doing things outside. But the minute you take them on a hiking trip, right, you're going to get stuck in a bramble. It's going to snag. The pockets and things are going to rip. That's not the case with the Origin stuff. So, make sure that you go check that out. Thank you guys so much for listening and supporting the podcast. We really appreciate it. And JP, you've shared a lot today about a lot of your teammates, a lot of your buddies. What are your final thoughts before we close out today's episode?
I just, when I was recapping all those guys, living with intentionality, it was a common thread in all of them. And I don't think I need to reiterate that, but I also think it's something that should be reiterated every single day. And it's just a good reminder of us to go out there and make the most of the opportunities that we have in front of us. And not one of those guys ever chose to be a victim. And they took control of their lives. They took ownership over their lives. And that starts with their mindset. And I'll just read that quote from Brad one more time, just as a reminder for all of us of how we should posture ourselves. To those before us, to those amongst us, to those we will see on the other side. Lord, let me not prove unworthy to my brothers. I hope this episode has been a reminder to go out and do the work that is needed, put in the effort, to build your legacy, and to never settle. This has been the JP Dinnell Podcast, episode 88.